sure, a boon or something like that, what do you do then? Right. Sounds good, Joe. Guess we're not to do that.
Good evening. I call this Iowa City Community School Board meeting on Tuesday, September 10th, 2019 to order. My name is Janet Godwin, and I want to thank those in the audience, those watching on YouTube, and those following on Twitter for joining us tonight. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. To my right, Superintendent Steve Murley, J.P. Clausen, Phil Hemingway, Lori Rotland. To my left, we've got Paul Ressler, Sean Ostone, Ruthina Malone, and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. The public is reminded that if we wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. And first up, we're back in school. We have our student representative update, and we'll start with Mira and Delton from City High. Hello.
Hi, it's just me tonight. I'm Melba Hughes, and I'm our City High class president, and I have a couple of updates, from the beginning of our school year. The Little Hawk, our student-run paper, was just notified that we are Pacemaker finalists. The Pacemaker is one of the highest student journalism awards in the country. It's so exciting. So our status as a winner or merely a finalist will be determined and announced at the Journalism National Conference in November. So we'll know then whether we've won Pacemaker or not. Secondly, last weekend we had two of our senior debaters, Ellis Chen and Simon Weiss, have an amazing showing at the Niles Township Invitational Debate Tournament, which is a nationwide tournament. Out of 184 debaters from across the nation, Ellis was named first speaker, which is amazing. So he placed first at the tournament, and Simon placed 14th. They both did really well. We had a large group of City High students, City High seniors, recognized at the Youth Salute program on Sunday, including the overall female winner. Our club fair happened last week, which is to help students be involved at City High, and we had tons of clubs, tons of student organizations present there. It's a wonderful showing of our City High community, and we also had a few new clubs this year who are doing really interesting things, like our caucus club, which is meant to help students understand the workings of the presidential caucus system. Our fall pep rally also happened last week, which is always fun, and our volleyball team was very proud to bring back the spike to City for the first time in a few years. It was very exciting for them. And finally, our Student Senate this year would like to make a few changes in terms of our environmental policy at City, and I would love the opportunity to come here and bring some ideas to you in future meetings. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you for letting me speak.
Before you leave,
of course.
who was the overall one?
Ellis Chen.
Okay, and someone else here got an award? Honored, recognized, yes?
Yes. You mean at the Youth Salute program?
Yeah.
Yes.
Tell us.
Well, the Youth Salute program commends student leaders from around our region from multiple different high schools, including Liberty and West High. We have representatives from them here tonight as well. And we had a big group recognized from City, all wonderful seniors, and I was very honored to be named the female winner for our region. So I'm going to go to St. Louis in a month and be able to represent our region along with a lovely young man from Mount Vernon who will be there with me. And it should be great, and we'll have the opportunity to apply for national scholarships as well.
Congratulations. That's wonderful. Next up, we've got Aditi from West High.
Hello again. I'm Aditi. I'm a junior at West High this year. So one thing West has started implementing this year is daily recycling. So we have Mr. Merkel, one of the teachers, along with our Best Buddies program, pick up paper, plastic, and aluminum. It's picked up and sorted every day. One thing we're also looking forward to implementing this trimester is composting. Will be coming soon as a result of some Student Senate initiative. West High has been ranked the #1 public school in Iowa according to Niche for outstanding college prep, academics, diversity, and teachers. So that is really exciting. Recently we heard this week that we have 22 National Merit Scholarships too coming from West. And we have won the first Your Prep School from the online school sports site. This honor was earned by finishing higher than other local schools at state tournaments. So last year, West qualified for state in football, cross country, girls and boys tennis, soccer, and basketball. Looking forward into this week and the coming month, we have varsity golf tournaments, volleyball, and cross country. Band department is having a mattress fundraiser this Saturday to raise funds for the music auxiliary department and the band program specifically. And then we also had a supply drive where we made 35 complete kits for incoming students at the Welcome Center. So yeah, that is all.
Great, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Next up, Ryan from Liberty.
Good evening, my name is Ryan Eystone and I am a student representative for Liberty High School. The first 3 weeks of school have been very busy and I'm excited to tell you about everything that has been going on. As part of the Equal Opportunity Student Initiative, Liberty held its first ever AP Summer Institute the week before school started. First time AP and Honors students were invited to a morning workshop focusing on skills that would help them in their AP and Honors courses. This group plans to continue working together during our Liberty Time interventions this year. We are happy to announce that for the first time, Liberty has 4 full classes. Before school started, all freshmen and new students to Liberty were invited to participate in a student orientation led by our National Honor Society. An overwhelming number of students participated and the day was a great success because of the leadership that those students showed. PBIS lessons were rolled out to the student body during the first 2 weeks of school. These lessons focused on teaching the Bolt's values to our new students, and they also helped to remind returning students of our building expectations. Liberty hosted their annual club fair on Tuesday and Wednesday of last week. Students stopped by during their lunches to explore the variety of clubs that Liberty has to offer. Liberty clubs are a way for everyone to feel as though they belong at Liberty. The Liberty High football team is off to a fantastic 2-0 start. The jam-packed stadiums watched an exciting game between Liberty and City to kick off the season. Liberty prevailed with the last-second field goal, and the Bolts carried that momentum into their first away game when they defeated Waterloo East this past Friday night. Our volleyball team is also off to a wonderful start with a record of 6-0. Liberty won the Battle of the Ranked Teams when they defeated Cedar Rapids Xavier in 5 sets. The stands were also packed when Liberty defeated West High in 3 sets last week. All of the hard work put in by the boys and the girls cross-country teams this summer is starting to pay off. The girls won their first ever team meet at the Bob Brown Cross Country Classic on Thursday. And looking into the future, our homecoming festivities will be getting underway in 2 weeks, starting with our parade on the 26th, with the football game on the Friday, and the dance on Saturday the 28th. Many are looking forward to the festivities, not just the students, but the community also getting involved in our parade, showing their support towards Liberty. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We have the ICEA update from Brady Shutt.
Hi, President Godwin, Vice President Ressler, Director, Superintendent Murley. I'm Brady Shutt from the Iowa City Education Association. It's nice to be here. We've started, so it's nice to get back in a school rhythm. I have just a couple of things for all of you and then the community as well. The 10th annual Get Moving for Healthy Kids run is this Sunday at 8 a.m. That's the starting music they'll be playing. And it's at 8 a.m. It's at Liberty. All proceeds benefit the Healthy Kids Community Care School-Based Clinics, which is a fantastic initiative and partnership that we have, and we're very lucky to have. If you have not registered, you can register at 7 a.m. on that morning. So, yeah, hope to see people there. Just a couple of political things, too. I guess if people want to know what 10 years of chronic and woeful underfunding of public education looks like, they just have to look at the class size report from tonight. And it's not where any of us in the room want to be. I appreciate what Matt and Amy and Chase and Steve are doing to help as we can and as the budget allows. But as people go into election mode and they start thinking about that, that's what underfunding looks like, and it's not comfortable. On a good note, I am getting ready for our first building rep meeting with our union members, and I am going to be able to tell them when we talk about our contract that every permissive item that we can keep in the contract is in our contract. And that's certainly not the case, and I was reminded of that when I was putting together the agenda for tomorrow night with my folks. So thank you for everything that you've done on behalf of ICEA for our teachers and our staff and our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Brady. Appreciate your leadership.
Thanks.
Welcome back. Okay. Okay. All right, very good. We'll go into community comment. First up, we have Stephanie Van Heusen, followed by Jeff Lauer.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Van Heusen, and I've been living in Coralville, Iowa for 17 years. My child attended Kirkwood Elementary. She was able to walk there. She was able to walk home. She was in the after-school program. My child attended Northwest Junior High. She was able to walk there. I've had other kids that I know, other students that ride the bus, walk from after-school activities to my home so that they could participate. And will be again this year because I live close enough that kids can walk from Northwest to my house. And my child went to West High. She got through our school system here without too many issues. I worked for the district for 7 years. I was not a team player, it turns out. I was told at the end. I was a whistleblower. I'm here because I am opposed to officers in our school, and I think many of you have listened to our community members and also understand that we are not wanting officers in our schools. It will just fill up the school to prison pipeline. It will give students who are black, who are brown, who are minority, who talk differently or act differently, people who have autism or are somewhere on the spectrum, people who have disabilities. It will give them likely a much better chance of getting a criminal record than it gives them a chance at getting an education in our district. I'm opposed to officers in a school not because I don't respect the work the officers could do, but because I don't trust the administration in our district. I don't trust them to treat our kids and their families with dignity and respect, and to be honest in their interactions. I don't trust the administration in our district to be confidential with students' information. And I could repeat many, many incidents of where we have seen this happen. But when we're talking about things like threat assessment teams, confidentiality of a student and a family's situation and information, and believing in the best about people is really, really important. I don't trust the administration not to retaliate against students and families and those who aren't seen as, quote, team players. So the SRO proposal is opposed by many in the community and is opposed by me. The threat assessment team, as proposed, was only supported by a part of the safety community. It has great potential to go awry and for students to incur enormous physical, psychological, and criminal harm from a team which cannot be trusted. If the administration would fire a skilled professional, one that has 2 mental health degrees and substance abuse degrees and long-term experience with students with disabilities and their families, who was beloved by her community, and board members saw that here. If an administration would fire someone or not renew a contract because someone was not a team player, because they were a whistleblower, what might happen? What could go wrong, and how could we get sued with an administration like this?
Thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate your comments. Jeff Lauer, followed by Julie Van Dyke.
Good evening. President Godwin, Superintendent Murley, board members. I'm Jeffrey Lauer. I've been up here a number of times in the past for different issues. Tonight I have a great pleasure to be able to present the district an award for leadership. This comes from the district's efforts over the last number of years in the area of responding to the threats of sports-related and non-sports-related concussion in school. The Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa, which I serve as CEO of, was at the point of the spear for forming the Iowa Concussion Consortium in 2015. And those of you up there have on the back of this REAP manual a list of the Concussion Consortium partners, including the Department of Public Health, Department of Education, the High School Athletic Association, and Girls Athletic Union. It's a statewide network of organizations as well as individuals whose goal is to reduce the occurrence of sports-related concussion through increased public and professional awareness, training, and safety, but then also to reduce the potential adverse impact of concussion when it happens. And the research in this area has been exploding over the last decade, as many of us see. But at the last Concussion Consortium conference, the board, or the leadership of the Concussion Consortium, voted to award the Iowa City Community School District with its Educational Leadership Award for exceptional leadership, teamwork, and response to concussion prevention, awareness, and response. This is in specific response to the district getting out ahead, and you'll see on the back of this document, you've got your logo aligned here, getting out ahead of almost every other district. Let me put it this way, there's no district that's farther ahead in this response than the Iowa City Community School District. Thanks to Susie Poulton, who's retired, and also Jessica Jimerson, the incoming health services specialist, Anna Monternock, and the other athletic trainers, Jen and Sheila, across this district have worked many hours to try to put together a policy and a protocol for our students. So let me just make sure I give this to you on behalf of the Iowa Concussion Consortium.
Thank you so much.
The other piece that I'd like to share is that the history of this is that in 2011, the legislature passed its first concussion law, which demanded that students of any kind be pulled out, particularly of athletics, if there were any signs or symptoms of concussion. You didn't get to go back in until a healthcare professional deemed that. This last year, in 2018, there was an update to the law, which now requires that districts have a 6-day step program for any student athlete after a concussion, whether it occurs in athletics or after school on the playground or at home. If the school district becomes aware of concussion, you don't go back into play for at least 6 days with monitoring. And then also a return to learn policy in which teachers are provided supports to understand some of the basic adjustments and accommodations that can be made in those 28 days. It's about an average of 28 days for 80% of kids to recover from concussion. And the earlier you load supports and accommodations, adjustments, we do accommodations with 504s and IAPs, but adjustments, the faster kids are able to recover. Great example, if somebody's concussed at the end of a semester or trimester and they've got a lot of work on their plate and they're not given any balance to that workload, their grades can go down intensely and they can delay their recovery for weeks and even months, which again perpetuates sometimes for years forward and sometimes for the rest of life. So your district is out at the point of the spear. Thank you. This has been supported, this effort with the Brain Injury Alliance and the Concussion Consortium has been supported by the Johnson County Foundation, specifically the Bywater Family Fund. So kudos to them and to your staff for getting out ahead. So just wanted to say thank you.
And thank you for your leadership. Appreciate your comments tonight. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Julie Van Dyke, followed by Melva.
So I've been following the school district administration, the school district for 10 years. I'm a graduate from West High. I am the only person in the room, I bet, who has actually been shot at on school grounds by a shotgun in the back of West High, where I placed the shell casings on the principal's desk and didn't even call the police. Anybody with me on that one? My sister's a cop. I don't hate police. I come from a military family. I have watched this district administration over and over again create emergencies that they suddenly rush in front of the board and say, oh my gosh, we have to have you vote on this because this is the best we can do, and the deadline's coming and we'll be fined if we don't get it done by then. They create these emergencies. How long have they known that they needed to do this? They're going to bring it up to you as an emergency, and they're going to push you to save them from getting a fine. Don't do it. Your job is to hold our district administration accountable, not to facilitate more emergencies and reinforcing poor behavior on their part. In the 827 OSHA work session after the board meeting, my son's school district administrators seemed determined to put armed SRO police in our schools with their Dirty Surprise Threat Assessment Team grant submitted without any prior public discussion or disclosure from a superintendent whose statement about the founded OSHA violations at Penn Elementary that night was to blame all of the blame on the kids. He didn't take any district responsibility, didn't acknowledge poor counselor to student ratios, understaffing, or anything else. At 1.32 into that meeting, he says, in this case, OSHA found that the danger to our employees was our students. So that puts us in a difficult position. It's not a crack in the sidewalk. It's not unsafe lighting. It's our children. If that's our superintendent's version of the truth about our school district's problems and what happened at Penn, as usual, taking no responsibility for it whatsoever, maybe he's in the wrong business. The 723 board meeting and work session afterwards was the first time I even heard about the Threat Assessment Team grant. I don't think anybody else heard about it that I know of before that. And I saw it go on as an agenda item for the work session as if it was a discussion about an impending grant. Imagine my surprise, sitting down and hearing Janet say our first topic is to get an update on our grant process, a grant proposal around our threat assessment on that process and our next steps, only to find out the grant had already been submitted. And Kate Callahan, a meeting or so ago, was asked to produce the grant. Kate Callahan says, I am unable to print a copy of the grant. So they want to run something through that they can't even print us a copy of? This is your responsibility to stop this, okay? I want to point everybody's attention to this, which you won't find on the district website as I searched for it the other day. This is the Iowa Department of Education Accreditation Final Report of the Iowa City Community School District on June 13, 2016. A site visit that came after the Grantwood AEA flagged my son and many other children's IEPs as the district being totally non-compliant with them in so many different ways. And then the State Department of Ed came in and sampled them again. Guess what? My kid's IEP got pulled a second time. Talk about retaliation. You better read this report before you vote on anything, because it makes it very clear that the district was, I'll say, dishonest with parents, and that the teachers and the parents that spoke to me and other parents, they told us that it was procedural. They told us a date had been wrong. This report, you better read this report before you vote on anything. SROs in our schools as paid employees will be able to circumvent FERPA, and they will be able to facilitate the violation of our children's FERPA, HIPAA, and civil rights, sending information back and forth, because when they're a school district employee, they need to know, and all of our children's rights go away. This is not the right thing to do, and their entire plan is based on the University of Virginia plan from 2001. You're voting on something that's 18 years old.
Thank you, Julie. Melva, followed by Lauren Nave.
Hello, everybody. My name is Melba Hughes, and I'm part of several committees here in the city. Black Voices Project's been one of them. And my son went to City High, and I think this would be a solution to this problem. If you would put this in the hands of the students. He saw two girls in the hallway one day fighting. So he took it upon himself to approach the girls and find out what their squabble was about. The opposite sex, of course. So he pointed out to them, you're wasting your time, because if you look down the hallway, he's already talking to other people. So that's a lot of money, $250,000. I think you're directing it in the wrong place to put adults into these positions. I think that money could be better used to, will be an incentive for the children, and put it in maybe like a trust fund towards them, that they have passing grades, help them into college. And my other thought to do with that money was like, darn, I've heard rumors saying that they're gonna tear down Hoover to turn that into a parking lot. Well, I'm not in construction. I dabbled a little bit when I was in a younger life, didn't get me anywhere, but I see that money has been to resolve your issue for parking, because I was picking up my son and I saw some of the kids were just, this one kid, he drove his car and it was teetering over a little ledge. A parking ramp. Ding, 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 ding. Take the Hoover building and build up a site where they can learn a trade. I met this man 4 years ago, and he was running for U.S. Congress. I couldn't vote for him because I wasn't in his district. But after the man gave his speech at this fundraiser, I approached him at the after party and I said, "Why are you not running for the presidency?" Another sensible thought. Bet y'all don't know who he was, do ya? He was the third Democrat to run for the president. He didn't win. He didn't win any of those seats. I saw him last year and I apologize that he lost both positions. But I'm just saying to you, if that man could give up his seat running for U.S. Congress, couldn't you think of giving up your seat and use this money to better the students? I'm also part of Johnson County Early Childhood Empowerment. The funding for kids is cut drastically. $250,000. Can't you see that as helping somebody get an education? We can't let America keep being run by people that are uneducated. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said that about this. Well, you know who he is. Anybody ever thought about how his education was maybe not so good? I'm almost ashamed to say to people that I'm an American, because this is the worst I've ever seen in this country in all of my life. In this leadership, it hasn't benefited anybody anything. It has torn families apart, and it has created a fear that maybe with task force could be used someplace else with a little more force to improve the, well, it's too late. His term is almost over with anyway. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Melva. Lauren, followed by Royce Ann. Hello.
Hi. I'll keep this quick. I don't have much prepared. I just wanted you to know I'm here with a couple of my children. We have 5 children in the district, all at 5 different schools actually. We're actually more in support of the SROs, and I would just consider you to weigh all the options, and I know there's been a lot of research and data going out about it. I personally like to trust the administration and feel that you guys are chosen and appointed for a reason. And I just feel like we have a very large district with a lot of students, and data shows that we just don't have the resources and the support with the SROs that large districts have, that it seems to be working very well. And so I would just encourage you to look at that. I also feel like it would be safety for all students, and you know, any race, ethnicity, I feel like that would be a really good thing. I feel like it would actually keep more kids out of trouble than putting more kids into trouble. And as a freshman last year, my daughter came home from City High at 14 years old, and there are certain bathrooms that she knows to avoid because of vaping and drugs and sexual activity and things like that, that's an alarm to me, that I feel like just more help for the administration and more help in the building would be doing something positive than negative. And again, I think it would just keep more kids out of trouble. Maybe some of those kids that could go either way, that might get into trouble, if there's more help and more people keeping them accountable in the building, that might actually keep some of those kids out of trouble. Like I said, the drugs are going to be a huge thing at City, at Southeast, at least that's where our kids attend. Bathrooms they're not going into, mental health issues and things like that. I just feel like more eyes, more resources, more people that care about these kids and that are there to help the administration. I just feel like it's a good thing, and I just would encourage you to please consider it, and we're in favor of the SROs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Royce?
Royce Porter, Johnson County Supervisor. I'm going to speak on two things while they come up. The first thing is I am not in favor of SROs. You already heard my story. I'm not going to repeat it. I don't have to repeat it. For the young lady that was just up here, she needs to read a little. There's more data. She having SROs. It's not going to help us in our schools. With this threat assessment team, I spoke with the chief of police. He don't want SROs in the schools as well, but we talked about a threat assessment team. And the way that he told me the threat assessment team was going to work with our school district, I was okay with it. But if it's going to be some kind of way in instilling SROs in our school, I'm totally not for it. So that's that, and I'll leave that alone. On behalf of these people right here, standing here on behalf of CWJ and the Black Voices, these they have students. They live off of Melrose Mormon Track. On McKinley Place. She moved there on McKinley Place 3 years ago. Before moving there, she asked questions as to the schools and everything. A bus picked their schools up and took their kids to school. Now that you guys have done some redistricting, their kids are being told they've got to walk their kids to Weber off of Mormon Track. And I know it's in the paperwork if it's 2 miles or whatever, but they got little kids. She has one child that is disabled that rides a bus. She's canceled that because if that one kid can be picked up, her little one, smaller than the other one that's being picked up, can't ride the bus. She don't have transportation. We have these parents here. There are families, different families, that they're walking their kids all the way to Weber School from Mormon Track. And we got to do something about that. This is a problem. And we even have people that's pregnant walking their little ones to all the way to school and back. We got to do something. We need a bus. I'm sorry. I'll stand here for our marginalized, and this is it. They cannot be walking their kids. They don't have transportation. The husbands go to school, go to work, or their wives go to work. There is no second car to get their kids to school. And so we can't keep their kids home, so we need to do something about transportation. Anybody want to say anything? Rushmore. Okay, so they're all the way on Rushmore, having McKinley Place and Rushmore. Cascade Lane, that's pretty far.
And there is more
That's
family.
all in the same vicinity. Come on, y'all, we know that's horrible. We got to get these kids to school. So I'm just here to represent
And the
them.
other thing, these kids, last year they used to go to Borlaug School.
They was
This
going to
year they
Borlaug.
moved them to there. And you know, most of our families, women, they don't drive. Most of people there are migrant. They are newcomer here. And the other thing, we have more about 10 families. They are not here.
More than 10, yeah. More than 10. Yeah.
They are not here today. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming tonight. And thank you, everyone, for participating in community comment. I think while I log back in, I think our next topic is to approve our agenda for this evening. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. I'm not getting yours to register.
No, that'd be yes.
Thank you. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Consent agenda. Phil, update on bills?
Yes. We had, excuse me. Yes, we had
$8.8 million worth of expenditures, $7.3 million out of the 31 account, the Go Bond account. So a lot of that was going toward construction on bond projects. Lori had done the books as well. She had some very good questions and ones that I support as well. There's a lot of administrative memberships that we pay for in the district, $20,000 worth, and it's something that comes out of the general fund. Our teachers pay for their own licensure. I think it's something we need to discuss at some point in time, that that $20,000 could help us with staffing as well, the general fund. Also, I was pleased to see us purchasing vegetables from local vendors, and so we had a Johnson County supervisor here, one that I've spoken with in the past. I hope they would have, wish they would have mentioned something about FFA and ag education and the importance of that, but they have expressed a desire for land at the Porter Farm to be used by students for vegetable growth. So I think at some point in time we could look forward to our students raising vegetables for our own schools. I think that'd be something good, but they're without those, everything seems to be in order.
I'd like to pull item number 12, Appendix 9.
Anything else directors would like to pull? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve consent agenda minus item 12?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I'm ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you. Appendix 12, or Appendix 9, excuse me, item 12, Appendix 9.
So tonight we have two schematic design presentations to give you. It's Borlaug and Lemmy. And I never thought I'd get here, but these are the last two projects in the facility master plan. So we finally got there. We were all in design or in the chute somewhere or been completed, and these two are on their way. So we've come a long way in 7 years. So the architect stepped out of the room, so I'm going to have Celeste come up first, the building principal, and she can talk a little bit about the process and some of the things that met her needs, and if the architect doesn't come, well, there he is. Go ahead, Celeste, you're up there.
Good evening. Once again, I'm Celeste Schofa. I'm the principal of Borlaug. And this evening, I just wanted to share that just was thrilled to be able to be working with OPN once again. They're the original contractor or architects for our building that opened back in 2012. And through the process, starting with our building leadership team, bringing those ideas then to OPN and working with Dwayne as well, working within our budget, we were really pleased with the outcome. And that's what's going to be presented this evening, really meeting our needs of having some additional instructional space, moving our music room so that we have a little bit better acoustics when it comes to instructing our kids and not hearing the drums as they play throughout the day. Also, too, working to the north so that we weren't taking away any of our playground area because our campus is somewhat tight. So we were really pleased with all of those things. Once again, the building leadership team was really thrilled with the scheme that came out, and then we shared it out with the staff. And once again, it was just overwhelmingly positively accepted. So I can't say enough about working with OPN and Dwayne as well. So I'm proud to say we are one of your last, but hopefully the best for last. Right? Right. Thank you so much.
When I first got here, Borlaug, you just moved in, and so.
That's right.
Yep,
That's
come
right.
full
So we're
circle.
getting it together.
All right. So this is Brady Dorman, and he's with OPN Architects. And OPN did Borlaug, as Celeste mentioned, but they also did Alexander and Hoover East. So they've done some nice projects for the district. So I'll turn it over to Brady for his comments. Or Brody, excuse me. Brady. Didn't have stage fright, did you?
No, sorry about that. Thank you to the board. OPN's enjoyed working on a number of Iowa City projects and certainly appreciate any opportunity to work with the district. So as Celeste mentioned, we have a single-story addition to the north with additional classroom space and expanded music space. We explored 3 different options, the single-story at the north, as well as a 2-story addition to the east and west. So here we have our preliminary site plan showing the new building and site impacts. Let's see. So we do have some tree removal and regrading to allow for the building and access for construction. The existing fire lane will be extended to provide access to the addition. We have a water line that will need to be relocated, but that is the only utility modification that we anticipate. There is existing geothermal under the new building, but it is deep enough that it should be able to remain in place, and we don't anticipate any issues with that. Here's just a proposed demolition plan showing how the existing music area will be remodeled to provide a new corridor to the addition and repurpose some of that space for some smaller support spaces. And the goal here was basically just to minimize impacts on existing structural walls and columns and so forth. And here we have the proposed floor plan with the new addition and the remodeled existing space. So we have about 3,900 square feet of new building and 1,500 square feet of renovation, so a total about 5,400 square feet. As Celeste mentioned, we have 2 new general purpose classrooms and an expanded music room. And one benefit of moving the music room to the single-story addition is that we have a little bit more acoustic separation, which the current school is having some issues with the media center right above. And the increased space of the music room brings it up to kind of the average standard for the district target for those spaces in elementaries. Other new spaces in the existing area, a new resource room, storage closet, mechanical space for the addition, as well as a new fully accessible single-user restroom with space for adult changing table if that is a need. So here we have just a couple of 3D renderings showing the addition and how it relates to the existing building. So you have the 2-story existing building with the media center above and then the 1-story. So material-wise, just trying to use similar materials to blend with the existing school, similar proportions of the windows, just to make it tie in nicely. Let's see, I think that's going up. Thank you.
Don't go far. You may have a question there. All right, so the budget for this project, the overall budget is $1.53 million. The available to award on bid day is right now is $1.25 million, and we're hovering around 1.35. So we're about 7 to 8% over at the moment, but we have several contingencies built into that, and so I feel comfortable within that 10% range and that we can get there through a little value engineering and more detail in the design. So with that, we'd answer any questions you might have, and Celeste, you may need to come back.
Well, this is a 7-year-old building that we're demolishing portions of it and renovating. In the project description, you have minor repairs. What other minor repairs? Is that what you're meaning in the demolition and rebuilding, or what needs to be repaired on a 7-year-old structure?
Yeah, there could be a number of things. Sometimes, we have HVAC controls or devices like that that are mechanical. I'd have to go back and pull up my list. I didn't bring it with me. Sorry for that. But there are some minor things in every building that are 7, 8, 10 years old. And the demolition, I should back up a little bit. The original facility master plan called for a music and art room. And we through the school and the discussions with the staff, felt they would benefit. They really liked the art room the way it was, and they would benefit by having the additional classroom space, because I think, and Celeste, you can verify, you've felt some pressure this year with boundary changes and enrollments, and felt like they needed the 2 classrooms instead of the art room. So it was a value choice. It was made at the site level, and as a result of that, we had to remove part of the original music room, so that's what you're looking at in demolition, is the original music room. And Celeste, would you comment on that?
Well, last year we had some huge growing pains, and with the redistricting, things, we were supposed to be reduced by 100. We were finding that really we're reduced by 50. And just with the growth that surrounds Borlaug, I foresee us continuing just to grow and grow. So we're just trying to be proactive and not feel what we felt last year, having to say goodbye to a preschool, which this year we got to welcome back. Just to give us that flexibility to have the additional space would be greatly appreciated.
Other questions?
Okay.
Hearing none. Thank you so much for the
Thanks.
presentation.
Thank
Thank you for your work putting that together.
Liza, you want to come up? Yeah, or did you? I had to write all these down just to remember. So this project in Lemmy Elementary is being designed by Shive Hattery and Tanny Branneman, and Tanny's been involved with the City High Fine Arts, the 2005 edition at City High, the 2015 edition at City High, 20 Elementary, the West High project, and probably did over half of our safety and security projects. So Tandy's been with us for quite a while. She's an Iowa City High graduate and takes a lot of pride in her work, and we're pleased to have her present the plan here, and then we'll.
Well, most importantly, she's a Lemmy Leopard alum,
Oh, that's
so it's
right.
only fitting for her to come back and work on our
And,
renovation.
and I need to tell you what a great sport Liza's been, because she's been last since day one, and you're last again, but not necessarily.
The best for last, right, Celeste?
All right, thank you, Dwayne. Last but not least, and yes, Leopard forever. So it's just been a great opportunity for me to be working with Eliza and all of her staff on this project. So we're just going to go through a quick presentation here to show you what we've been working on. Image that we have up here is our site plan. The big gray area represents the existing building, and I'm sure everyone in this room is very familiar with the building here. It was a building built in 1969 as an open plan school building where all of the classrooms was just wide open and they had operable partitions years ago. There's not very many rectangular corners in this building anywhere. Everything is an angle. So we are adding on to this building on the front. There was a lot of discussion regarding this, but this makes the most sense in terms of playground space, layout, as well as being able to help the front entry aspect of this building, because if you've been to Lemmy, it's very difficult to know exactly where to enter. What's our best way to start on this? Thank you. So here is the building addition. We are adding a music and art room as part of this project, along with the support spaces that go with that. We are also adding a larger gymnasium, like many of your other. Do you want to try to zoom in for me?
No, I was going to, yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm
Or
not
you
very
can-
good at it.
Oh, no, you're great. You're doing better than I would probably be doing. Large gym, like many of your other schools have, along with storage spaces. We are also doing a large addition. Oops, I knew that was going to happen to me, Dwayne. How did you, no, I want to be back here, but I didn't see how you zoomed. Thank you. Oh, you just wanted, thank you. That's good. I just want to be able to get to where we can see that. Thank you. So we are adding on to the main office area as well. We're actually going to be removing some of the space in order to create some more usable space in the main office area. Again, this is an area of the building where all of the angles come together, and it presents some challenges in terms of having some usable space for the main office area. We are also revising the main entrance area. We're going to have a secure vestibule like they do now, but we're actually going to open that up so that you can see it and have better visibility. There will be better visibility out to the parking lot. We are also increasing the number of meeting spaces for the building because there really isn't any meeting space for Lemmy. The restrooms in this building, there isn't a single ADA compliant restroom in this entire building. And so we are replacing and improving some restrooms in this building so that we can have ADA restrooms. The gymnasium and the entry area, I think one of the key factors here that was discussed with the staff and Eliza is having multiple levels of security. So this is a precinct for voting. And we have designed the main entrance area so that the voters will have access to the gym and a small restroom off of the main corridor, but not access to anywhere else in the entire building. So on voting day, the voters can't actually get into anywhere else in the building. They just get the gym and they get access to the restroom. Then we have a next level of security. So if this building is being used after hours for an outside event or a Parks and Rec use of the gym, they will have access to the gym and the larger restrooms, but nothing else in the rest of the building. And then the third level of security where kids can go, where kids need to go during the day. The next thing that we're doing to improve Lemmy is our major renovations. We call this major renovations because it's impacting a very large amount of the existing building. Everything in gray is getting new finishes, new ceilings, new flooring. The green areas represent new finishes in terms of flooring and ceiling, but also we're adding corridors. So as we mentioned, this was originally an open plan school building, and the district over the years has added walls to separate these classrooms, but that means that the outermost classroom, and I'm going to just kind of zoom in because we've added the corridors so that you can't really tell this, but these outermost classrooms currently, you actually have to go through a classroom to get to that classroom. There's no way to go through that room without impacting the adjacent educational space. If these kids want to use the restroom, they have to go through a classroom to do that. So we are adding corridors. This is something that's been done at Horn already. And for Lemmy, it just hasn't been done. So we are doing that throughout all of the classroom pods. The area that's kind of in this area right here, this is actually an expanded serving kitchen so that there's more space to handle that function. So these are our minor renovations. So we did talk about adding an art and a music classroom. That's actually going over here to the east side of the building addition. Again, it's similar to Borlaug. We're getting those spaces farther away from classrooms to cut down on noise and disruption. And that gives us an opportunity to actually use the existing art and music, which are kind of in these areas here next to the kind of purple area. Those can be used for preschool, which currently Lemmy does not have. There's a space in between that there's some good sanitary line located right below this area, and we're going to convert that space into 2 restrooms for the preschool classrooms. That covers that. And as part of all of this, as always, and as Dwayne mentioned on Borlaug as well, we always have a way to protect budget. We have some protective alternates as part of this project. These are the larger alternate bids that we are showing here now. One of the other things that this building has is a media center right in the center, and there's no walls. So again, just like going to get to the classroom, you actually have to walk through the media center to get to all of these classrooms. So one of the things that the school would like is to actually put walls around the media center. We would expand it into some adjacent space that's within that sort of hexagon. Again, we don't have, well, let me get any bigger, but we don't have any rectangles. So we would expand that to make that larger, put in the corridor around here, and make that more user-friendly. And then we also would renovate all of these surrounding pod restrooms to meet accessibility, along with a few other finished alternate bids. And I believe lighting, LED lighting is an alternate bid at this point in time on this project. And then our last, most exciting slide is our exteriors that we have here. So this is just the concept that the school has approved in terms of how this building addition will look. When you come up to visit Lemmy, you will actually see the main entrance. You'll actually know where you get to go into the building. We've got this great element across the front of the building to help draw you to that main entrance, bringing it up, making it taller, letting in some natural light so that people actually can know where they're going when they get here.
All right. Liza Proctor, building principal.
That's me. We've got a team of fantastic teachers in the back that have looked through the plan and given a lot of input to make sure that we are using our space optimally. I know Vice President Ressler has been at, I usually talk loud enough for everybody to hear me. Vice President Ressler has been at Lemmy for, oh, how long, Paul?
10 years. So he's very well aware of our layout, and we are just super excited to get to go through this process. We have looked at every different angle to make sure that we've got spaces within our building where we can be together as a whole school community. Right now, we just have a small multi-purpose room that also functions as our gym and our lunchroom, and that is a lot with a student body of 375 students to be able to manage all of that. And so we're looking forward to being able to be in this space together as one school community. We're really excited to not have to interrupt the education of other students by walking through one classroom to get together, and it's also just a safety concern for if anything were to occur in one classroom, you have to go through that to get to another. So Tandy has been absolutely fantastic to work with. We are very fortunate to get to work with Shive, and Dwayne has been a real joy. And so we did have to wait for last, but we think it's been worth it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Very good. Questions?
Yeah.
Wait, I'll give you the budget numbers.
Okay.
So on this project, we have an overall budget of $7.976 million, basically $8 million. And we have 6.7 toward on bid day. And right now we're at 676 with our last estimate. That does not include the alternates that she mentioned. So we're hopeful we can still work some of that into it. So with that, we'll answer any questions you might have.
The code upgrades that are described in the project description, is that the ADA bathrooms, or what else is involved?
Some of the code upgrades, other code upgrades that we'll have besides the bathroom upgrades, will be that we will be providing a sprinkler system to the entire building to do this building addition, and based on the construction of this building, a sprinkler system is required. So that's one of the major code upgrades that we'll see as part of this project.
Okay. One thing that we have discussed that with our renovations, we want to make them usable year-round, and I guess a gymnasium that has access to a small bathroom and can be accessed that way is kind of on a line with that. The library, although I don't know that that would meet kind of our discussions, would the library be accessed during the summer without having to go through the entire building? And would there be a restroom available for that if you wanted to open that up for public hours during the summer?
There is a restroom available.
Right outside the.
Yes, there's a
Yeah.
restroom available with the security.
When you enter the library, there's a restroom right on the left there when you go into it. But the answer is no, that's not as easily accessible, or you can't isolate that the way you could the gymnasium area.
Right, and is it do I interpret the drawings correctly that 1/3 of the classrooms do not have a window to the outside?
Pretty fair assumption. There might even be more.
One of the things in our discussions with BLDD in the very beginning of the facilities master plan was the need and recognition that ambient light was preferable, and I think there's something fundamentally wrong when a first grader or a kindergartner can't see a snowflake fall or a leaf fall from a tree. And how many, so it's more than 1/3, you say, Dwayne, that will not have access to ambient light?
Honestly, I think there's 6.
That's kind of what I thought.
There's 4.
Is there anything you're doing to remedy that situation?
We've actually talked about adding some natural light through skylights into those classrooms.
And the library is the same type of situation in the center of the building. It will not have any ambient light unless these skylights are added.
Correct. It currently does not have any ambient light, and so we actually have already talked about adding skylights to improve that current circumstance.
Okay, and if you wall in the library, will you be losing square footage, or how will that be? Will it stay about the same, or?
We actually gain square footage if we wall that in because we are able to take over space within that hexagon. Some of that space is actually occupied by small classrooms, and those small classrooms are being made up for in the building addition. So we actually add square footage because the corridor space, whether it's walled in or not walled in, has to be maintained as circulation and can't be used for actual media center function. So it actually gains space overall.
I just have one question. Well, first of all, I'm happy to see that this project's finally come to be to this point, because trust me, I've heard about it for the last 3 years. Why are we last and where's our project at? My question is on the entryway, Dwayne, and the yellow overhang. Something that we just changed at Northwest, or North Central, was to eliminate those gaps. Is that going to be an issue with this design?
Yeah, he's talking about these three design elements. Go right ahead.
You want me to answer that?
Sure.
That has not been brought up to us. However, there are a lot of ways in which we can add an element to the top to add covering there. One of the reasons that we show it open at this point is to help draw natural light farther into the building, because we can have windows actually off of the corridors into some of the classrooms, and particularly the one that's closest to the main entrance. If we put windows in that, we can gain natural light through the light that comes through that's south facing. So the more we close it in, the less light we get, but we can always add a feature on the top that will actually help close that off. If you're worried about water and actually providing an actual canopy cover there, we can actually do that to help cut down on concerns with birds and other things that might happen there.
So I would say to you too, Director Ressler, that this entrance is much improved in the fact that you can see it. The one that's there now, you have to walk back into the building to actually find the entrance, and it's probably has too much cover. So this brings us out, but we have a running joke in the physical plant. We let the architects do one thing that doesn't make any difference. This is the one. It doesn't really. It's just there for looks.
Right. Yeah, I was just, because as you know, at North Central, they had the concern with icicles and all that stuff. So.
Here, if we need to. Yeah.
And Tandy and I just discussed one other thing about lighting. When we put these corridors into the,
Yep, we can go back to the other one.
right here,
Yep.
you're actually creating outside corridors that go to the outside walls. There can be some windows added there, and you can actually add some of those interior classrooms could actually have windows put in the wall to let daylight kind of filter back into those rooms as well. So there are other ways to do it besides skylights.
Two that are stuck with skylights.
Very good. Any other questions from directors? Thank you so much tonight. Appreciate it very much. Wow, I feel like this is a milestone, the last two projects. Right on. Is there a motion to approve item 12, Appendix 9?
So moved.
Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you. Moving on to presentation tonight, we've got a presentation around threat assessment. First, I just want to make a couple of comments. One is to once again thank the Safety Committee that put together a whole set of recommendations, of which threat assessment process was one of them. We've had many conversations about this in work session since that set of recommendations from Safety Committee came out, and I do want to thank that committee again. I also want to thank all the community members who've weighed in on this matter. We're blessed to have a community engaged as we have. This is a topic that we've had a range of positions presented, but I can say with absolute certainty that all of those ideas coming forward are around good intentions of making sure our schools, students, teachers, community members are safe in our environments. And so that all kind of gives me a great deal of optimism that we will work through this together to come up with a solution that addresses our safety needs in our district. We have some guests here tonight to help present this topic. Chief Matterly from Iowa City Police, Officer Cook from Iowa City Police, Eli Hodgkin from University of Iowa, and I'm missing some. I'll perhaps let you introduce yourselves. There's a presentation that we have, and I'm guessing that this team in front of us will be making that presentation tonight. Thank you so much for coming and your patience as we get to this topic. Chief Matterly?
Green is go. Thank you very much. Jody Matherly, Police Chief, Iowa City. I want to thank the board for inviting us here tonight and talk about threat assessment. And I want to start out with a few things. And Josh Lovick, I don't know if you said his name or not, and Peter Bergson, both with the university. So I want to talk about a little bit why we're here, why we're not here, and then also turn it over to Detective Gabe Cook to do a little further presentation. He's our resident expert here for the police department. The other three from the university are experts at the university level, but it certainly plays a part with us, and they can shed a lot of light on this process. We are here tonight to talk about, ways that we can be creative and maybe reduce incidents of violence in our schools, but also create a safe climate for the students to be comfortable and confident that when they report something, that something will be done and it'll be done properly. As I see it today, we operate in a bit of silos, and that's not uncommon when we're talking about multiple entities striving towards the same goal. And when I say silos, it's somewhat of a vacuum that gets created because of a lack of cooperation, communication, coordination, things that aren't intentful, but just by our very nature of our jobs, we just tend to do things separately, and there's not a lot of follow-up and feedback and documentation of the incident and of the future of the, in this case, the student involved, or sometimes faculty and staff that's involved as well. So the threat assessment process was put into place decades ago by many entities to tackle that problem. Is it a good fit here? Really, at the end of the day, I think it could be, but we also know, and I know as 17 years as a police chief, that it's budget driven. It's where do you deploy your resources? It's where are their priorities? And we're not here to tell you what you should do. We're here to shed light on the information and to be part of the solution. We'll help you at any level. We can continue on as we do, and we have a great partnership with you folks and with the community. We could have a full-fledged SRO program and spend $1 million and put cops in every secondary school. Or we can find common ground and maybe do something in between. So really, at the end of the day, we're here for you. We're not advocating one method over the other, but we want to be part of a workable solution to make sure that everybody, including our community and the parents and everybody else, is comfortable with the decision and how we move forward. I do want to point out a couple things. There was concerns about, well, what if there's one police officer assigned to a threat assessment team? What about the other law enforcement agencies? They don't stop doing their jobs. We don't stop ringing the bell when something happens. This is intended to work with other law enforcement agencies. It may very well be a North Liberty officer that's the threat assessment officer that is working with the schools, and we're working with them, or some other scenario. But there's mental health, there's judicial, there's all kinds of players involved in this system that work together. So one party is not left out, and one party is not left to do everything. This is a team effort, hence the threat assessment team. We're also, in the Iowa City Police Department, very cognizant of the disproportionality and the disparities that everybody talks about. So I want to throw a couple numbers at you. In the last 6 years, we have increased our contact with juveniles, calls for service. That means people are calling us and ringing the bell. We've increased juvenile calls by 40%. So the number's rising, just more contact with juveniles. That's not all trouble calls, that's not all crimes, but we're coming in contact more and more with juveniles for whatever reason. But we've reduced our arrests in that same amount of time the last 6 years by 44%. So more contact, less arrests. We're getting better at what we do, and Gabe Cook's taken the lead on that, as well as the rest of our department in finding ways to improve that. What I also want to point out is by race, we've arrested 40% less black youth in that 6 years, so the trend continues to go down. For Hispanic youth, we've reduced it by 76%. So we're cognizant of those numbers. Those numbers are important to us. They're important even for our adults. If you look at our website, we've reduced disproportionality minority contact for traffic stops. For the first time this year, we are at a parity level, that is a one-to-one level for issuing citations. You're not more likely to get a citation if you're a person of color than if you're a white driver for the first time this year. And we've trended that down. So this isn't an overnight success. We worked for a decade on having success in that area. And so we look at the numbers and we figure out ways to defeat it and to make it right. And that's what we're doing. It would continue with this. If we have a threat assessment team and there's an officer working with the schools, we're not aloof to the fact that we need to be careful and cognizant of disproportionality and make sure that we're being fair and consistent and we're addressing the right thing at the right time while still keeping the schools safe and reducing incidents of violence. That's our goal. Can it be done? I think we've shown that it can. So with that, I don't want to keep beating it up, but I will give Gabe the mic. He'll start with a PowerPoint, And then the university can chime in, and the rest of us with any questions or comments that anybody may have. But I think his PowerPoint will address a lot of the facts that we're trying to get out tonight. So thank you.
Thank you.
How do I switch slides? Okay. Got it. Perfect. All right, I appreciate everybody's time tonight. I'm going to go through a presentation, probably 20 minutes or so. In reality, I could probably do a 4 or 6 hour presentation on this topic, if not several days. So we're going to go through it quick. I do believe that all the board of directors have been provided a copy of the PowerPoint so they can look through it after this and contact us with any questions they have. But I'll try to get through the whole PowerPoint. If you have questions during it, if you want to maybe just jot them down or take note of them, then when I'm done, I'll have a seat and we can answer any questions that you have. But like I said, I appreciate the opportunity and the privilege to be here tonight. What is threat assessment? Threat assessment is the process of gathering information to understand the threat of violence posed by a person. Threat management is the process of developing and executing plans to mitigate the threat of violence by a person, and it's a proactive problem-solving approach to violence prevention. So the Virginia Threat Assess model, this is the most widely used model that's research-based for K through 12 threat assessment in the United States. It was established in 2001. It has been extensively examined through field tests and controlled studies that demonstrate its effectiveness and utility. It's widely recognized as the most comprehensive threat model in the country. Approach to violence prevention that emphasizes early attention to problems. Designed to be proactive and problem solving instead of punitive. The goal is to solve the problem and find the underlying issue, not to arrest people. It's also the preferred model of the Sandy Hook promise. And this would be the model that we would propose using if we were going to do K through 12 threat assessment in Iowa City. Research findings, I'll go through these and then provide you the literature, the manual that you can look these up later on if you want them. After training, school personnel showed decreased fears of school violence and reduced support for zero tolerance approach. This is big on anti-zero tolerance approach, which I think most educators will agree is a good idea. After training, school personnel showed knowledge of threat assessment principles and the ability to classify cases reliably. Few arrests, 841 cases, 1.2% of those cases resulted in arrest. I think that's pretty successful. Racial and ethnic breakdown of the 841 cases in this particular research, 53% of them were white, 27% of them were black, Hispanic, or 27% was black, 9% was Hispanic, and 11% was other. The racial and ethnic composition of those schools that these students attended was similar, 55% white, 21% black, 13% Hispanic, and 11% other. So pretty close to being right on there. Examined disciplinary consequences for students receiving threat assessment in Virginia, found no disparities among black, Hispanic, and white students in out-of-school suspensions, school transfers, or legal actions. No disparities among black, Hispanic, and white students in whether the student was given out-of-school suspension, expelled, or arrested. So then they compared schools using the Virginia model versus schools not using the Virginia model, whether some of these schools didn't have a threat assessment model at all, or they used a different model. So those were the two controlled groups that were used against the Virginia model. Students at the school using the Virginia model, which is the VSTAG, reported less bullying at their school. The Virginia schools experienced a 50% reduction in long-term suspensions over a 2-year period. The control group schools that weren't using the Virginia model showed no significant change. The Virginia model school students were 1/3 as likely to receive a long-term suspension than control group schools not using it. The Virginia schools showed a 79% decline in bullying infractions, which this one really caught my eye, while the control group schools not using the Virginia model saw a slight increase in bullying. The Virginia schools recorded 15% fewer short-term suspensions and 25% fewer long-term suspensions than the schools not using the Virginia model. Short-term and long-term suspension rates were lower for both black and white students in schools using the Virginia model. And like I said, all this information is in the comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines, intervention and support to prevent violence. There's a whole chapter on research and also quotes the research if people want to look into the studies further. The threat assessment team. Threat assessment uses a team approach. That's a very important part of it. Team members include administration, law enforcement, counselor, social worker, mental health worker. Benefits of the team approach include having a more complete picture of the individual or situation, open communication, and having a diverse group of perspectives to gain information and help assess the situation. So the threat assessment process, and like I said, this is a day-long class on training for this, but I'm going to go through it quick. Step one is evaluate the threat, obtain detailed account, and consider the circumstances. Step two is attempt to resolve the threat as transient. Is the threat easily resolved? Is the threat retracted or an apology or explanation offered? Respond to a substantive threat. Take precautions to protect all potential victims. Look for ways to resolve the conflict. Step 4, conduct a safety evaluation for a very serious substantive threat. Screen for mental health, law enforcement investigation for evidence of planning and preparation, criminal activity. Develop a safety plan that reduces risk and addresses student needs. And step 5, implement and monitor the safety plan. Document the plan and maintain contact with the student. Steps 4 and 5 are critical, and it's often what's missing in current practices here in Iowa City. For instance, in a school setting, oftentimes I see just the principal and maybe a superintendent or assistant superintendent discussing steps 1 through 3. The comprehensive team approach is missing. Step 5 is also very critical, that all agencies continue to support the student to ensure safety and that their needs are being met. This is often missed with current practices. The kid's suspended, he's sent home for 5 days, and no one really knows what's going on. I mean, that's a concern, and and we do the same thing at the police department, where we maybe arrest somebody that has some issues, and then they're just sent back out in the community, and no one's really following up on them. And like I said, this is key with threat assessment, is the follow-up and communication with, I use student, but this could apply for a staff member, parents. It's a lot more than just students. We label and categorize the behavior, not the person. No student's going to be labeled as a potential school shooter. No student's going to be labeled a high risk, a low risk, medium risk, or a number. We only label the behavior, which is transient or substantive. We will not label a student. The reason you don't want to do that, obviously, if you label a student high for something that's legitimately a serious concern, more than likely that student's going to face bias for the rest of his academic career, at least that year, whenever he's involved in a minor situation. And next thing you know, that student's going to be continually referred to you when really they probably shouldn't be. Also, it could be traumatic for a student to be labeled as a high risk too. So like I said, we categorize and label the behavior, not the person. So a transient threat would be threats that do not pose a serious risk of harm, and do not express a lasting intent. The substantive threats are statements that express a continuing threat to harm someone, and those are the more serious ones. Threat management. Develop a safety plan to reduce the risk of violence and address students' needs. Plan includes immediate steps to prevent the threat from being carried out and a plan for further action. At this stage, this is where most of the plans and current procedures in our district stop. And true threat assessment involves much more than those first 2 bulletin points. The plan will include provisions for follow-up with the student, which is, like I said, the number one thing I think we fail, in situations like this, not on purpose, but we can do a lot better job, is follow up with student to verify the plan has been successfully implemented and meet the school safety needs and the needs of the student. The team continues to monitor the plan and situation to make revisions if necessary. And then there's provision in there that's included for a follow-up review. Types of cases benefiting from threat assessments. These are all real cases that I've dealt with in the first 2 weeks of school. That would be threat assessment cases. I'm going to go through limited details in several of them. I'm not going to go into details with all of them, but incident last week where an individual was stabbed. In the course of that, a student in our district was threatened with a knife. The perpetrator fled the scene before police arrived, so they're gone. We can't find them. We have a woman that's been stabbed, and then her daughter that's been threatened with the knife. That daughter goes to school that day, and she's at a high school in Iowa City, and the school has no idea any of that happened. Well, clearly, the threat assessment team would immediately have been involved in that, and communication would have been made to the school. One, she could need some services. That's a traumatic incident to see your mother get stabbed and get threatened with a knife. And two, what if the perpetrator, who's still out and about, shows up at this particular school? That's one example where threat assessment would work. And then, like I said, if we had a threat assessment team, even days after that, we'd continue follow up with the student, make sure she can safely get to and back from school, and just make sure she's safe. Another incident where we had a student that was suicidal, and we showed up, and he had a knife and was threatening to harm himself with a knife. This student lived in Iowa City but didn't go to school in Iowa City. He went to school in a different town, but in the Iowa City Community School District. Once again, there was a breakdown in communication, and no one communicated to that child's school that he was having some mental health issues and could use some additional sports. It's another thing that the threat assessment team would follow up on and monitor and make sure that they have their supports and don't fall through the cracks. Then obviously there are the serious threats of violence, like the shots fired this summer at Mercer Park, where there's 4 people in a car, 3 of which are current students here in Iowa City that had a firearm and that were shooting at another car and towards a park full of kids. That's something that clearly could be a safety issue for the school district, and the threat assessment team would monitor that and hopefully help stay ahead of any issue that would become. And I don't even have on the list. Sunday night, I get a phone call at 6:30 p.m. A student posted a picture of a gun. Happens to be the same kind of gun we had stolen August 30th. And the administrator at that school is getting all kinds of calls from I think parents and students saying, hey, so-and-so's got a gun, where he's going to bring it to school. I get in a group text with some administrators and the assistant superintendent, and basically they were like, what should we do? How do we handle this? Let's ask Gabe. Luckily, I was available. I just got back from Peoria, Illinois. But we need a better plan than that. We need a clear-cut plan of how we're going to deal with all these situations, because we had another social media incident today where another high school student in our district was threatening violence that I got involved in. So, I mean, these are happening every week for sure, but probably, I mean, the amount of work and benefit from the threat assessment team, like you said, these are all real-life actual cases. So the proposed Iowa City Community School District ICCSD threat assessment plan, this was put together with the chief and I'll say I, but this is the chief's doing. One law enforcement officer would be dedicated full-time to the Iowa City Community School District to serve on the team. That would provide consistency in response and bring a level of expertise to threat assessment when working with school-based teams to review threats and coordinate responses, and the ability to give undivided time and attention to the district and coordinate and provide training. The law enforcement officer would have an office at the ESC. The team would have a civilian threat assessment coordinator that would work with each school-based team to review threats and coordinate response, and also coordinate training with law enforcement. The school-based teams would include the administrator at each school, a counselor, student family advocate, and then the threat assessment coordinator, which would be the civilian school district employee at Central ESC, and then the threat assessment officer. Associated costs and funding for the threat assessment team would need to be determined. So what's the law enforcement role on the team? Expert in threat assessment. Whoever would be in that position would need to be trained in threat assessment, potentially be a certified threat assessment manager, be a member of the, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, access to all resources on the county team. We're actually in the process of developing a county team. It actually was before this even came up. On that team, we'll have police, DHS, crisis center, jail alternative, county attorney's office, the University of Iowa threat assessment team, the UIHC, juvenile court, DVIP, and RVAP. So a lot of good resources that we can all work together there. The ability to assist with dedicated follow-up, especially outside the school setting. Obviously, right now, you guys aren't really able to do that, or you don't. If you have to do some follow-up outside of the school, it might be difficult and not safe at times for your administrator to go out and do some of that follow-up. But this allows the law enforcement role. That's something we do on a regular basis, is follow-up outside of the school. And like I said, in all honesty, if I had to say what your biggest threat was, it very well could be a parent versus a student. I mean, we just don't know. It could be a staff member. I mean, so this covers a wide range of people. Provide training to team members, and be the dedicated and consistent respondent for phone calls or questions from school administration. Right now, I do my best to take these calls, and I get called a lot, enough that my supervisors called me in multiple times over the past few years and said I need to quit working for the schools and answering all their phone calls because I have other cases that I need to get taken care of. I do my best to balance that, just because I think it's important. If there's an issue at the school, I want to be available and try to help everybody out and be a resource when I can. What is not law enforcement's role in the team? A lot of people here are talking about SROs. This threat assessment that we're talking about here has nothing to do with SROs. The threat assessment officer would not be a school resource officer, not meant to be a police presence in buildings, not meant to be called for fights or behavior issues in the buildings, and not meant to assist or have input with school discipline. If there's an issue at a particular school during the day and they need law enforcement, they're not to call the threat assessment officer. They need to call the routine line, or if it's serious enough, 911, and have a patrol officer come out and deal with that. So FERPA and HIPAA considerations. As far as FERPA goes, schools may not disclose personally identifiable information from students' education records to outside parties, include law enforcement, without written consent from parents or eligible students. And one side note on this, some of the school districts that do threat assessment that I've been looking at, and I've talked to some people from the Lincoln Public Schools in Lincoln, Nebraska, and most of the time when they're doing a threat assessment on a student, it's more a care assessment and it's assisting them. And the majority of those, the parents give written consent for the law enforcement to have, any records that they feel are necessary. Exceptions to FERPA, though, include with a health or safety emergency, in order to protect the health and safety of students or other individuals. Information provided in such times may only be provided during that emergency. In order to comply with a judicial order or lawfully issued subpoena, observed behaviors and overheard or directly heard comments and/or third-party reported observation comments, FERPA doesn't apply, and I think that's probably the biggest error that educators make. If they hear a student say, hey, I'm going to go shoot somebody, or if a student says, hey, so-and-so heard somebody say they're going to go shoot somebody, that has nothing to do with FERPA and is not protected. And that's how threats of violence, that's how majority of the information comes in, is overheard comments, indirectly or directly, or third party. That's not protected under FERPA. HIPAA has similar law enforcement exceptions when there's an imminent threat to health or safety. So why do we need threat assessment? In my opinion, to prevent violence before it happens, to prevent bullying, to prevent self-harm, to do due diligence in protecting the safety and welfare of all students and staff in the district, to provide a comprehensive support system to individuals in crisis, to protect the district from civil liability. There's just a court case not that old in California, I'm not going to get into, but district was sued for $54 million. A kid went inside the school during the school day and shot another student. They were sued for $54 million. The jury found the school 50% liable. However, they did lower the damages from $54 million to $4 million, so it only cost the school district $2 million. That school district did have a threat assessment team and plan in place. Whether or not that had anything to do with them lowering the, award $50 million, I don't know, but I think it probably did. Currently, there's no consistent research-based model to evaluate and assess threats in the Iowa City Community School District. And I really think that's what we need to get to, so we're all on the same page and we're all doing this the same way. That way, when these things pop up, we're not calling each other or texting saying, what do we do? How are we going to handle this? Once again, I appreciate you guys for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. Questions? Are there, please, go ahead.
Sure. So, thank you, Gabe. If you could just take a minute, maybe I can have Eli or Pete or somebody from the university talk just quickly about their program.
Please.
It's been in place a long time, but also how they handle confidential information. I know that was one of the questions that got brought up, and they're well into that process already. So if you could just shed some light on that.
Hi, Eli Hotchkin, Threat Assessment Program Director for the University of Iowa, and I appreciate having me here to kind of give some input about this. It is something I very care about and a profession that I've been in for a while, and I truly believe in it. The one thing I'll tell you about our threat assessment program is that it was created in 2008 after a tragedy in Virginia Tech. During that time, they found that the solution or a problem to correct this target acts of violence is to implement threat assessment teams. And since then, almost several institutions of higher ed have started to implement the threat assessment process. The University of Iowa was mandated by the Iowa Board of Regents to have a threat assessment program at the university. So the University of Iowa, UNI, and Iowa State all have threat assessment programs. Our program consists of a threat assessment team and a threat assessment advisory group. Similar to what's proposed that Gabe has shared with me, that our threat assessment team is really kind of the boots on the ground to respond to reports of concern. And those reports would be similar to what I hear the threat assessment team and also the kind of the police officer and the care coordinator at the district level. Our threat assessment advisory group is a group of campus partners who we meet with regularly to talk about complex cases and consult in difficult situations. These are very complex situations and require a lot of expertise to help guide and navigate some of these issues. As for going back to the question for how we protect our information or what information do we keep, those sort of things, what I'll tell you is that our team consists of individuals at our hospital. Peter Berkson is actually a threat manager at our University of Hospital who is an agent of the hospital and is compliant with HIPAA. And so we have to navigate those issues, and we have assistance with our general counsel's office. As far as student records, we, like Gabe had said, the FERPA information that he provided is the same thing that we follow through as well. Our threat assessment records, if there are any, are only privy to our threat assessment team. And then if there is any disclosure, it's vetted through our general counsel's office.
Just a few questions. When we had our work session, Chief, you talked about the different agencies and things, and it was briefly in your PowerPoint presentation, all the different departments and things. I asked at that time for, you said you had an email or something with a list with all those. I still haven't received it to this time. I am used to not getting information from staff here, but not a member of St. Mary's. So is there a way we can get that information coming forward?
Sure. So the list that I have is just starting. It's conceptual. We've contacted a handful of people and said, as this Johnson County threat assessment team gathers who would be interested. As a matter of fact, Grant Woody, AEA, grabbed me that night of your work session, said, put us on the list. So Yes, I'm sorry I didn't send that to you, Phil, but
Right.
it's not solidified yet. It's going to continue to grow.
If it's a ongoing thing, then
Sure.
great. We'll just keep adding to it. But
That's where it's
it'd be
at.
helpful for us to know exactly, because we get people from the community that want to know, okay, who all's getting this information?
Right.
Who all's included in that? So I think it's important for transparency purposes that,
Absolutely.
we all be sharing with the same factual information.
And these are agencies and organizations at this point and not individuals, so who would actually be on the team would be appointed. But suffice it to say that like Eli just talked about, the ongoing conceptual, high-end cases, complex, hey, we need somebody in this arena, that's why that team's put together. So we're always on the same page, so we train together, we have the same expectations, the same amount of knowledge, and can use those levels of discipline and expertise to share in a solution, and not just law enforcement. We're not looking at charging these folks.
Correct.
We're looking at preventing charges through a better system.
Right, and talking about discipline, in your presentation on this Virginia model, where you cited all the drops in bullying and things like that, did they use restorative justice as a discipline in their schools? What other factors were in that besides just the threat assessment? Or do you contribute it solely to threat assessment?
The research I read didn't say what else they used. I believe threat assessment would be a big part of it, but I'm sure there were some other factors that they were doing that probably helped.
But you don't know if they used restorative
No,
justice?
I'm not aware of that they used restorative justice.
Okay. All right. One other, we've heard a lot of things from the community, and there's some concerns, and I have concerns too, just also about freedom and our rights as individuals, and with something in the paper where the Iowa City Police Department is getting into an agreement with Ring to utilize that video, which anyone who owns a Ring must understand that in the fine print, they don't own the images, Amazon does. And that's concerning to me that a for-profit business would have images that they would share without the person's permission, and how that might be incorporated into this. Also, I have concerns with facial recognition, which anyone who gets a driver's license, their face is digitized, and that database is then shared in that. And so as far as any anonymity of just being a person walking around is rapidly decreasing, and I'm concerned about that as well. And in your presentation going through, we've had emails and we've had a principal talk about drugs in the schools as a reason for these types of things. You didn't allude to any decrease in drug use or anything like that with the Virginia discussion. Was that something you had data on with this as well, or?
I did not have any data on it. That is an issue, I believe. Somebody that's suffering and dealing with substance or drug abuse, if the threat assessment team got involved with them, we could provide them resources, and I think that would be helpful to them.
Right, and I know when I first got on the board, we had an incident, and I talked with the people at the U of I and at that time they were making a big deal to me of saying it's a care assessment, because in all these examples there's a need for care. By, whether it's to prevent themselves from causing harm to themselves or someone else in that, but there's a need for that. In the example you used as well with the lawsuit, it didn't prevent, the threat assessment team didn't prevent, it was not going to prevent anybody from being sued, because we can be sued for any reason, whether we have a team or not, and whether it's successful or not.
That's correct. And to expand on the threat and care assessment, the university uses that word interchangeably for their team, because the majority of the time it is going to be more care than threat, because the care side of it, whether you're trying to help individuals that are harming that want to harm themselves, and stuff like that, providing care and services for them, the drug abuse or drug addict would be the same thing. So they use threat and care interchangeably, and care would probably be what you would use more often as far as dealing with people that are actually a threat.
Yeah, and there was an incident that happened in Cedar Rapids recently with a BB gun. The school district talked about it. They said that, you know, there's a fine that the student is facing, and could be expulsion for a year and things like that. They brought it very rapidly to the public. One thing that we have had some examples of in our district is when we rush too quickly to a decision, and that's a concern too, because I recognize the importance in assessing quickly where it is, but also we have to be careful of the fact that we don't label someone incorrectly. We don't perceive bullying as something, the bullied person doing something as self-defacing or diffusing the bullying, and they get faced with something else. And I think it's something that's something that is concerning to me, is that you know, I recognize the importance of getting care to the people that need it, but I'm also concerned that we can cause harm to people who don't deserve it, and will have a stigma and things going forward with them.
Right, and I think that's why we focus on not labeling students. You know, we categorize the threat as the transient or substantive. And as far as the BB gun example, simple BB gun possession, if that occurred in the Iowa City School District, the Virginia model would absolutely be against expulsion for that student just for simple possession of a BB gun. And I'm not sure what CR is doing, but if that's the road they're going down, I can tell you that's an example. I mean, that's a zero tolerance policy right there that the Virginia model is not for, and would not be for expulsion just for, you know, having a BB gun in your backpack.
It looked like you were getting ready to jump in, Chief. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, about 3 times. So I'm not sure why the cameras got brought up, but let's be clear. The Ring system it's called Neighbors, and it's an app that anybody can get. You can own an Arlo, a Nest. You can have a cell phone. You have no camera. You can join this app and simply submit video if you witness a crime, or you're asked by the police department, hey, you live in that neighborhood, did you happen to catch this crime on video, or this bad guy's car? So it's all voluntary. It's not something that Amazon gives to us. They would never give that to us. You can own different systems that aren't owned by Ring and Amazon and still submit those videos. So I want to make sure the level of trust here is crystal clear, that we're not turning our agency into a police state and taking ownership of video.
The information I was sharing is what I heard on the radio today on King Commando.
So I just wanted to clarify.
The Ring specifically, which is a trademark.
Sure, but again, it's all voluntary. So then the other issue is when we talk about labeling somebody too fast, too early, that's the problem we're having now. There's an inconsistency in response, because at any given time, I've got different officers handling different situations, and we have no continuum or no understanding with the school of how should we handle things. We handle it the best we can, but we apply the law a lot of the times, and we don't use other resources, and that's a big hole. So to have a pre-plan, to have a continuum, to have a full understanding of when this happens in our school system, the lower level stuff, which is a large percentage of the stuff that we'll be dealing with, should be handled by the schools. And we want that. We don't want to be called. We don't want to deal with it. Let you guys deal with it. When I was a kid, if there was a fist fight, principal took care of it. That's okay to do. And we want to continue that and make more of that. As of now, when they ring our bell, we respond, and I've got a 3-year officer going, what should I do? So they need guidance. We need communication, and we want that consistency. This team can help set that continuum to say, let's define when police should be involved, and when they are, how do we handle this? And let's do it with multidiscipline, slowly, methodically. Let's first of all make sure everybody's safe, and then let's follow up and be slow and consistent with this, so we're not mislabeling, so we're not overreacting, so we're not over-suspending, and we're taking care of the problem long-term. That's what this is all about. So what you said there was exactly what is happening, and we need to get over that. So this system does exactly that. That's why those stats are there. I wouldn't be standing in front of you if this wasn't a solution. I can guarantee that. We can do business as usual.
Yeah.
But I see holes in the system, and I think it can be improved. We need to do that.
Now, but one of the examples that was used was the gunshots being fired in the summer on a public street with vehicles, which we have no DMV authority. We don't have control over the streets other than buses. And, you know, I don't know that, you know, it did involve students in the summer, but I don't know that you really want us telling you how to do your,
No,
that's your,
certainly not.
as I see it, that's your job. That's yours.
You're right, Mr. Hemingway, but my phone rang, as yours probably did too, after that incident, saying those are students involved and school's starting soon. Are they bringing those guns to school? That's a legitimate question. So that kind of communication, even though it's off premises, we'll handle that. We do it all the time. But is it going to bleed over into the school system? And if it does, are we prepared to deal with that? And we want to make sure that you folks are well informed, that is the school administration, and the day-to-day, you know, folks that are handling the school system, and that we're staying in communication. So this would help close that gap as well. No, certainly you're not going to guide how we do things off-site, and you know, we do that 70,000 times a year. That's how many calls for service we take. So we do this quite often. But there are things that either occur on school grounds, or they're off grounds but related to the school, or they come back to the school, or there's fear placed in the school because of that incident. We want to address all those things in partnership.
Couple questions, may I, unless others want to jump in? One has to do, Detective Cook, you mentioned training. And I'm curious about what that training protocol looks like, because I think that quality and fidelity of training is something that's really important to get to the kind of consistency of response that you were just talking about, Chief, that we're not doing this on an ad hoc, one-off basis, that we've got a trained community of these threat assessment professionals, as well as building professionals, et cetera, so that we can have some assurance that the responses will be consistent, standardized. So what does that training look like? I'm just curious what that, and is it one time, or do you have it, you know, refreshed over time, that kind of thing?
So my recommendation would be that the core members of the team, which are it would be an administrator, a counselor, a student family advocate from each school, all would be trained in the Virginia model. I believe is it a 1-day or 2-day training?
Is there a certification that goes with that, or some kind of credential, or just?
There's no certification. It's a 1-day training, 8-hour training, depending on if there's rollover in that 3 kind of individual school-based model, then there might be additional training that's needed for the new training. The Virginia model does have a fidelity to go back and check to see if the practice is being how it's taught. And so that can be done at certain time frames to measure whether and you need to do another training, or what you need to change members out, whatever it needs.
That was actually one of my follow-up questions too, is how do you assess the efficacy of the program? Do you keep your data? Do you go back and do, you know, sort of after-action reviews so that you're continuously improving the practice and then doing more training if necessary?
With the Virginia model, they use surveys for students, staff, feeling of whether they feel safe, whether those sort of things, to kind of see the effectiveness of it. They also look at, you know, like some of the statistics that Detective Cook gave with, stats relating to suspension, arrest, and those sort of things.
Obviously, the greatest question I get asked, well, how do you really know that you're preventing acts of violence? Well, my answer to that is it's really hard to quantify that. I mean, you know, everything that the threat assessment professionals, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals that I'm a member of, they'll preach to you that they absolutely do think threat assessment prevents violence. However, they said it's difficult to quantify that, because if intercept in the pathway of to violence before the violence actually happens, it's hard to really know, well, was that person really going to go through with the violent act? All we know is we have prevented it, but it's hard to quantify. Another thing on the training is the initial training. Like I said, everybody would get trained. I think my recommendation would be then the threat assessment officer and the threat assessment coordinator for the district would go to a training, which I think is 2 or 3 days long, where they're able to then provide the training for the Virginia model. That way we can do continuing training for administrators and staff members, and obviously you're going to get new administrators, new counselors, new student family advocates, and then we could train them at no cost because we'd be certified trainers.
Very good. And maybe one more question while I have the floor for the University of Iowa team in terms of your path for implementation of the program. What did you just flip the switch and you automatically had it? I mean, what was that path like? What did you learn along the way? If you had advice for the district, what would that be? I know it's a little bit different environment, university to a K-12 district, but just curious to get your lessons learned.
Yeah, so in 2008, we started our team with the Board of Regents requiring it. And it started with me as a police officer, and also we had a social worker, mental health professional. And we kind of tried to figure out the best way to implement the program. And, stereotypically, law enforcement and mental health didn't necessarily get along. But what we realized is that we worked famously together. We worked really well in concert. And it was helpful to see different perspectives in doing that. So we started out with, as I said, law enforcement and social work. And we just worked all the cases together. And it was really helpful to get each other's view on the cases that we work. Because as Eli said as well, all the cases can be very complex and nuanced and unique because you're working with people. And you're looking at their backgrounds, you're looking at their histories, their trauma, and not only the people, the subjects of concern or the victims, the targets, but you're also looking at the people who are reporting the concerns as well. So, threat management is something that can be difficult, but sometimes the fear management can be even more difficult because you never know where people are coming from and their fear base. So, threat assessment really helps to to look at behaviors, look at communications, and really it's a proactive problem-solving approach to violence prevention that's been very effective in our university.
And to add to that, why did we come? Really, these incidents, the target acts of violence, shock our conscience. The Virginia Tech incident really shocked the institution of higher ed. The Iowa Board of Regents made a decision in 2008 to mandate the threat assessment programs in the university. I will tell you, prevention work is very hard to fund because you're not going to predict whether something happens or not. It's very difficult to sit here and tell you that we're going to prevent a lot of different things with it. What I will tell you doing this work, we have prevented things. It was that step that the Board of Regents took to say, you need to have a threat assessment team. If we weren't there, it'd be a lot more difficult. The University of Iowa is very, very thankful to have the support from its administration. The University of Iowa supports our threat assessment team and supports us to do the work that we need to do to keep our campus safe.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Our goal, our ultimate goal is to, prevent violence. But I'll tell you, along the way, we identify a lot of people who just need help, just need assistance in some way, who are struggling in one way or another. And, that's one thing that threat assessment does. We look at and we're able to provide resources for those people. We get to be creative to figure out, what's going on in their lives that's causing them this grievance or causing them these problems. And we're really helping a lot of people along the way. Our goal is violence prevention, but really the people we come across along the way are people who are struggling, having difficulties. And if we're able to help them to be successful and figure things out, then we really are preventing violence. We really are helping the community in a lot of ways.
Chief, I know you mentioned that you had reached out to several different organizations regarding threat assessment team, and I see on here team members would include counselors, social workers, mental health workers. I would imagine folks from the juvenile court system, and I'm just curious, have like DHS, Crisis Center, those organizations seen this plan and provided feedback on it? Or are we the first step and you're waiting to get a sense from us and then go out there? I'm trying to sense, like, what's the community organization's thoughts on this plan?
Sure.
Since we would need everybody.
Sure. So we have not met with everybody yet and actually talked about, getting this thing up and running yet. When I say that, it's going to occur with or without the school. If the school's not at the table, we started training in this 2 years ago, I guess it was. Eli invited me to a conference, and excuse me, that's when I saw my first interest that this is something that we needed. And so we started to get the officers trained up. We've trained 4 officers and a supervisor. And so we're just getting it off the ground. We're going to use this model in many cases, just like the university does too, with or without the school's involvement. So our point was that this would be a good model for the schools as well. Some of those agencies you talked about, probably the university are in touch with at any given times. But we have strong relationships with a lot of the advocacy groups, the service organizations, obviously the courts, mental health workers, because we do that every single day. But to solidify it, get them in a group, and actually coordinate and train together is the next step.
Okay. And then another question was, one of the exceptions to the FERPA rule, and if Eli, you guys can talk about this, or as well as Detective Cook, one of the exceptions was health and safety emergency. Who quantify what's a health and safety emergency? Who makes that determination? I mean, if you want to talk from a perspective, like from the UI's team and then from the district team, who would say, yes, that's a health and safety emergency, so we're going to make an exception to FERPA?
Yeah, I think first thing that we do have guidance from our general counsel's office to help us determine kind of what those are. We also have training in FERPA to kind of understand what are those exceptions. The one thing is that what I will tell you is that there's they keep FERPA broad because they can't pinpoint specifics within health and safety. Health and safety can be very broad. I'll talk about in some of our cases, sometimes that can be involuntary committals, transport from police officers into the hospital because they may be in immediate harm to self or others. Sometimes it's just completely irrational. If we think there's a safety need, we would rather take that risk to go to safety to inform parents or someone else than not to inform. Because we do not want to say, well, if I don't inform that and then something escalates because of that, or that safety could be deteriorating, then that wouldn't be our job. Our job is to keep our campus safe. That means keeping our faculty, staff, students safe. And with this model, I think it says the same thing, that whatever it's needed to keep the students safe, then that would need to be judged by, one, a professional like an Iowa City police officer that has experience doing some of these things, that has knowledge in crisis intervention, that has knowledge in mental health, and immediate harm to self or others as well.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. So I'm trying to understand the structure here. Are there building teams and an overall team? Because I saw 2 different slides. One's
Yes, so each team would have their individual building team, which is the administrator, the counselor, the student family advocate, and then also included in that it would be the threat assessment coordinator and threat assessment officer. And then there is I'm not going to say a much larger team, but a larger team which would basically provide oversight, which could be legal counsels, superintendent, assistant superintendent, that would also have oversight as part of the larger team. But the threat assessment work is going to be done pretty much only by the 3 team members at each school, and then the threat assessment coordinator and threat assessment officer.
So the information from the building teams doesn't necessarily go to the overall team?
Well, to those 5, all the information would need to go to those 5 people, but yeah, I would not see a need to go to the superintendent or assistant superintendent. I mean, we could, whatever database they use, which I know they've looked at some stuff, you could restrict access to it for whoever you need to. But those 5 for sure would be, since they're the ones that are actually working the cases, would need to know all the information. Also, I'm not allowed to take it, if I was the threat assessment officer for the school district, I'm not allowed to take any information from that case and pass it along to police officers at the Iowa City Police Department or use it with any criminal investigations or to assist criminal investigations at the police department. It's completely separate. It doesn't go into our record system or anything like that, which I think is important for people to know.
And as we mentioned before, majority of the cases could and should be handled at the school level itself. The more complex cases, the more serious cases, certainly handed up and handled by the team at the district level, involving the police officer as well. But for coordination and documentation and follow-up and like Pete talked about, some of the stuff where you say, we're seeing indicators here, maybe there's something going on in this student's life that needs some attention. That's the kind of stuff that could get passed along and use the broader multidisciplinary approach to give assistance to that child.
So when you talk about that you're already going to do this model in the community anyway, are you talking about this team?
Yeah, right, the Johnson County
here
team.
on the slide?
And here's why. We get calls all the time. Hey, so-and-so, these are adults. So-and-so posted something on Facebook and he says he's going to go into work tomorrow and he's going to shoot the place up. Red alert. So what we found was the same thing you folks are dealing with is, okay, I got a midnight shift officer that's handling it. It may or may not have got communicated directly. It may have or may not been handled as well as it could have and should have been. What do we do for follow-up? Who do we reach out to? And so, we took care of the crime, if there was one, and we took care of the immediate threat, and we just weren't real good. And every agency I worked at, we've struggled with this. And I just saw a need that we needed to perfect that process. Really, social media is one of the big indicators because we see so much of this stuff going on social media, sometimes direct, but much of it comes over Facebook and some of the other social media. And so as the numbers increased, I saw a need that we needed to be better at what we do. So training and threat assessment wasn't in reaction to school issues. It's a reaction to community issues that we deal with daily. My point was, as we sat down and we continued to look at some of the holes that we have with communicating with the school, you guys shared, your administration shared some of the problems that we were experiencing, then a team approach just made sense.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes the individuals who we're working with, they might be in school, but they also go home to their family. They also go to work. They also recreate places. And something about the community team is that we have people in areas where they can assist, because we notice that sometimes people are having difficulties. It's not just one area of their life. It's many areas. And if we can bring resources together and work together to figure out solutions, then maybe we can help that individual get on a different trajectory, a more positive trajectory.
And to clarify your initial question, I know Kate Callahan provided you guys a handout. Basically, the district level team, which would be more of the oversight, would be like an HR representative from the school district. The threat assessment officer and coordinator would be on that too. Director of Student Services, Health Services Coordinator, and your mental health coordinator, your general counsel, and then your Director of Diversity and Cultural Responsiveness. So those would be on it. That entire team would meet less frequently because the 5 people that are doing the threat assessments and actually the boots on the ground would be the 3 people at each school, then the threat assessment officer, and then the threat assessment coordinator.
So this district team that you just mentioned would not be reviewing the information that the 5-person team is reviewing? Are they going to see these?
I'm not sure if we decided for sure how that's going to work. I know we modeled it similarly to what the university does. These guys here are their boots on the ground, but then they have a meeting, I don't know how often, of a similar group, and I'm not sure if they review the cases or not or how that works.
I would say that would, to my, with little understanding, but a little understanding with that, what I would say is that, yes, they would review the more complex, serious, substantive threat cases. For instance, I would ask, does the district know now, how do they screen like serious threat cases? Do they get notified about those? How do they process there? This is something like if the school, secondary school, cannot handle because it's a more serious threat, that it would go up there to get more vision, more complex resolution to this, more, input, and, eliminate bias and any decision making that may not be here. So does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. When you're dealing with a specific student, say, that is hooked into a lot of different community services, do you bring the professionals to the table that know that student, or are you just going to use the student or the school team? For example, the district contracts out mental health services to a number of different agencies. Would you bring the therapist that's actually working with the student into that discussion, or would it just be a school discussion separate from the therapist?
Yeah, we would try that for sure. Our process only works with collaboration. And so the more people we can get to support that person with resources and support to resolve this issue, we're going to do it. The thing is that every situation's different and every situation's very complex. It also requires, for us, sometimes it requires a student sign a release of information or something along the lines for us for permission to talk to the individual and to bring them in. But more than likely, it's not an adversarial process. And so more than likely, if we did have a student of concern in our cases, we're going to say, hey, can we help out here? Can we solve this problem? Who else can help support us in this? Is there someone that can support you during this process to help? And so that's kind of the process that I would see. It would be similar to ours.
So if you know the student's already hooked into several different agencies, you might bring those providers to the table because they would know the student the best.
Yeah.
Probably better than the school even does, potentially. And last question, what does the threat assessment officer wear when they're in the school? What clothing are they wearing?
Obviously, I wouldn't have the final say on that, so I'll pass to the
I'll
chief.
chime in. Our intent would not be a uniform position. It would be plain clothes, and the idea wouldn't be deterrence and apprehension and so it would be a soft dress, something like what I'm wearing, or and that's something that could be decided in collaboration with the school itself, but not a uniform position.
Would they be armed?
Yes. All our officers have to be armed. But again, I don't foresee us. We're not going to assign them to the secondary schools themselves. Not that they wouldn't visit the schools on a case, but they wouldn't be patrolling the hallways and responding. Nothing
Yeah.
changes in that area for us.
Yeah, and I understand that, but they would potentially be visiting all of the schools at some point.
At any given time, and they would certainly be armed, yes.
And they would be seen by students.
Yes.
Hi, I got my first chance to talk. I'm Josh Slovic. I'm part of the University Threat Assessment, and I'm on the police department at the university. To kind of address the attire concern, I dress like this every day to work, and depending on the situation or the circumstance with the person of concern, if I want them to know that I'm armed or not armed, I will dictate that going into the meeting or with the interview, whatever it may be. I may throw a jacket on so they won't even know. So.
Questions, GP? You want to jump in?
You guys have answered a lot of questions, and I sent a few. I really appreciate that. A few points I really want to make. Right now we have nothing. We have inconsistency. We have handled things poorly in the past. That's the problem, is it's inconsistent, and so we don't know what to expect, and that's a problem in care situations, and it's a problem we have when we're dealing with people making legitimate threats to the school. I also want to point out, Chief, you said you'd had a 40% rise in juvenile calls in the last 6 years, 44 fewer arrests, 40% less black youth, and 76% Latinx youth. So you guys are doing way better than the district. I mean, we have no numbers that, our numbers are not improving much in this area, certainly not dramatically. The other thing is, Dewey Cornell has a lot of peer review. It has a lot of research behind it. There's a lot out there. It's been around for 18 years, and a lot of people have been using it and studying it. And that's where we're headed, is we want to be data-driven. If we're going to make big decisions like this, where we know we have to figure out a system, it's got to be driven by data, and it has to be supported by the research. And that's what I have found with this model, is it's there. You shared a lot of labeling behavior, not the student. That's critical. I think right now, we're working on that as a district, and I think we have a ways to go in our discipline to really understand that actions are behaviors, and there's no judgment about this person. And I would guess that a lot of that sort of underpinning is why you're seeing good results as far as disproportionate contact. Anti-zero tolerance. This is huge. They're not coming around and saying it, but a lot of emails we're getting, I feel, from community members that support, and they're not talking about threat assessment, they're talking about SROs, are absolutely have the frame of zero tolerance. I mean, that's sort of the framework that it's coming from. Get this stuff out of our schools. We don't want to deal. And I want to emphasize to the public that this is not that approach, that this isn't, in fact, this is the opposite approach, that we need to be wrapped around. We have to do better follow-up. I think we all know that. A kid gets suspended 5 days. That was a great example. We don't know what's been going on. We don't know when they're coming back. We don't know what kind of state of mind they're going to be in. And so hopefully, involving, and I'll say this too, I'm on the advisory council for RVAP, right? And so RVAP is in charge of a big region. And I can tell you that the experience RVAP has with Johnson County and Iowa City is a lot different than the experience they have in Lee County, as far as their concept of victims and crimes and what that means. So I appreciate that we're bringing in the mindset, right, that really tries to understand the individual, wrap around them, and get them the support that they need. And like Royce said in her comment, I really like the way Chief Matherly explains it, and if that's it, she can get behind that, right? And what that says to me is this is about trust, because we can have a great system, a research-based, show it, but we've got issues with trust in our community, and it's hard to just tell people we'll do the right thing when they say, well, what about this time when you really didn't do the right thing? And it's hard to come back and say, well, we got to get better at that. But I don't think that's an excuse for doing nothing. And when we're going to take an approach, it has got to be the most data behind it. It's got to be with these understandings about disproportionate minority contact. It's really got to understand the mental health perspective. I'll say another group I'm a member of is JJYD, so the Juvenile Justice Youth Development Team. And Chief Matherly, I'll just say this, we have a hard time keeping law enforcement folks on the JJYD committee. So, one opportunity, because, UAY is on that committee, and, the neighborhood centers and a lot of other folks that are working with our juveniles. So I think sort of engaging that specific committee at the county level, and I'm sure you're going to, kind of be doing that with Lynette and as you bring the county in, but I think that, we're a part of that as well, and I think broadening this conversation to including UAY, and Ruthina mentioned the Crisis Center and DHS and some of these other agencies, so we really know that we're all on board. And so to the point of trust, I guess, my biggest concern is, do we as a district have the capacity to keep data safe if we're collecting it? Grades are one thing. If somebody finds out what a student's grades are, the damage that that's going to do is not great. But if certain people find out mental health problems or certain social situations that families have, and that gets out, like that can change careers, that can change trajectories. That's just more sensitive data. So healthcare data is more important to keep private because of what can happen if it gets into the wrong hands. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I know, right now, we don't have we don't know what that's going to be. And I'm a little afraid, I don't want to put the cart before the horse and then get in a situation where, we've been responsible for some unintended consequences. And then I would also, just when you look, and that points to kind of the members of the team. At the university, obviously a lot bigger institution, you've got 4 people, right? And there's a long list here of the people the district would involve. And I just, wonder if, we want to have enough people involved to make sure we're making the right decisions and we're looking at all angles, absolutely. But do we want to be mindful of kind of how many people are seeing kind of these situations and think about it from that perspective. But I do appreciate the presentation. I think that we need to be really clear with the public. This is not about SROs. This board has not expressed support for SROs. I can tell you the supportive emails we're getting aren't talking about threat assessment. They're almost all talking about SROs. And I'll tell you, they're saying, many of them, it's about the drugs, right? And that's a problem. And sometimes police need to be involved in that. But I don't want people to think this is going to be the cops coming into schools to clean up the drug problem, right? Because I just, it's not the correct, it's not what this is being used for. It's not meant to be a police presence in buildings. It's not meant to be called for the small stuff and that's what people in the community are saying. Hey, you need to help our principals with this problem. And they're not talking about any of this. They're not talking about, they do, of course, they're worried about shootings, right? That's the school shootings is on everybody's mind. Right? But they are also trying to fill in and say, oh, you are also going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, X, Y, Z. So I want to be careful that we're not setting the public up to say, or our staff to say, okay, this is what this is going to be, and it's going to help with all of these other problems. That this is really specific to threats and potential threats and understanding kind of where that comes in. So I want to say that more for the public who are watching on TV and who are here, what this is not, because the status quo is problematic. It's really problematic that we don't have a plan in place. And so thanks for the information.
Others? No. Well, another big thank you for folks coming out tonight and providing really good information. The presentation was very well done. Appreciate it, and sincerely appreciate all that you do in support of our schools right now. Appreciate the University of Iowa coming and sharing your insights and experience in this matter. We're going to obviously be continuing the conversation with the board and our constituents as we make some decisions going forward on how we're going to approach this. But you've given us a lot to think about, a lot of good data and a lot of good insights, and want to thank you again for coming tonight and presenting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to transition to our discussion item on class size update. I think this is Matt and Amy.
Do you want to start?
Let's start elementary.
Good evening, everyone. Kristen, do you want to bring up maybe the RAM?
Sure.
So we've presented a couple documents at the elementary level. One is the RAM that you're accustomed to seeing. This year, you see us implementing the RAM 5 model instead of the RAM 3 that we've done the past several years. As we think about where we were with that conversation starting last December and thinking where we needed to be with budget reductions, this is certainly on the radar and put forth as one possible solution to help with where we were with the budget. Not necessarily where any of us wanted to be with having to go to larger class sizes, certainly at the elementary level. But like I spoke to the principals in August, when maybe they were seeing some shifts in attendance numbers, we are just now implementing all of those cuts that we had to make last year as part of that $5.2 million reduction. The pie hasn't expanded. We're still now just implementing, what we said we needed to do to get through this.
So again, I would just say this isn't necessarily where we would ever want to be with upwards of 31 and 32 kiddos in some of our 3-6 classrooms across the district. But again, it is what we said we needed to do to get through this. I would point out that we pretty much just apply the formula as stated, depending on where the buildings fall in the RAM. We did have to go back then in a few instances in 5 of our elementary buildings to show what the actual FTE was, because the model would actually show that they're quote-unquote overstaffed. And so if you look at, I'm going to give you an example of Borlaug, for instance. If you go down to Borlaug, they're in that RAM 5. They're the second one over from that upper left corner. You see that Steve has highlighted the cell in 4th grade. We actually have 3 teachers assigned there for the 63 students. The formula would pull 2 staff there. And working with Celeste even just as late as today, that number's 65. And so they are at the top of their aspirational goal, which makes it hard then for us in those 5 instances. If you look across the document, you'd see 5 buildings that way, that we simply decided not to pull staff as they're sitting at the top of their aspirational goal. You know, as we moved through August and September, my document actually should have read that, the other one that I have posted in there to show you, you know, where the changes occurred. We did have some instances, roughly that 3rd week of August, where we did see the writing on the wall and made some decisions to pull some staff members from a few of our buildings and reallocate them where we saw the need. Since that time then, the numbers have continued to settle a lot better, and we've been posting for those other positions then that you see where we've awarded FTE. We've got one other example where the building's actually over their aspirational goal, and that's down with Lincoln, having a class of 33 down there, and that's also shaded. But we've given Julie permission just most recently to go ahead and add that. So we still have kids coming, and we apply the rule with our school secretaries that if we hadn't heard from any families or students 7 to 10 days into the school year, then we're dropping students. So this data is, you know, accurate every day that we get out farther from 10 days of school happening. And I think with that, I just entertain questions.
I got one quick question, just because I was preparing for DPO tomorrow. I was looking at this chart, you know, that we were kind of mulling over the numbers in the spring,
Yep.
right, which looks significantly different. The thing that draws my attention, and it was actually kind of mentioned when I met with Les and Nick to kind of get some understanding about some stuff, is how we've added more teachers from like the initial numbers, and it was in my head it was a smaller number, but when I look back at the chart from spring, if you look in the top right of the thing, it has the total number there, and it was like 335, and it's now 352, right? So that it's a huge change, and you know, not just all the pieces were shuffling around on the board and here and there and everywhere. It's just an increase overall, and so. One, I appreciate the fact that we've got the resources to put them there to help some of those class sizes, but can you kind of walk through
Sure.
how we got from, you know, those 2 pretty big different numbers?
In March, it was actually around March 29th, at the very end of March is when we started allocating staff. And during that time, because of the attendance zone changes, that was creating a bunch of shifting happening, right? And so as Chase and I worked through that, fairly methodically. Our numbers that we were working through at that time were roll-up numbers for 1-6, but our kindergarten numbers were our hard numbers of who's come in to e-register or who was sitting out in our preschools that we could see that hadn't e-registered yet. So our kindergarten number was really low. So what we did at the time is we had it figured out that we roughly had 345 teachers on the bus, and that our model was pulling 336 FTE at that time. So what we said to ourselves is we knew that more kindergarten students were going to show up. So we took 9 extra FTE, so we were certain that as we were transferring teachers around, that everybody would have a seat once the dust settled. And the way we made the determination about where to allocate those 9, so we got up to 345 at that time, was if you were a building that had a kindergarten section or kindergarten grade level that was 9 or fewer students away, you were allocated the FTE. Most cases we got it right, and some we had to shift.
I have some elementary questions. First, you mentioned e-registration, and I know I've talked to you guys about this, but it seems like it was a bigger issue this year. Maybe I was just more aware of it, but of not having kids e-registered on time.
Yeah. So Adam was able to actually pull some historic data, and I wasn't talking to him constantly about that, but as he would watch e-registrations coming in, he felt like it was occurring at the rate that it had generally occurred. But what you're speaking to is so, so important for us when we go to make these staffing decisions. And so what we watch is not only the projections of what we thought was going to happen in the spring. That number kind of sits in the RAM. But the second thing we're watching is, of those numbers then, how many are e-registered? Because we don't know that those students are truly going to walk through the door until they're e-registered. And what we don't want to do is change someone's livelihood or their teaching position, hoping or thinking that those kids are going to materialize, and then they never do. So we are literally every day pulling it every day. And if once we see the e-registrations are there, we'll do something. And in the case of the 4 teachers that got moved, we saw it happening early enough that we felt comfortable to do that. But good question. E-registrations are so important. As Chase and I and Steve will talk through, you know, what's the best way to allocate staff, and it's just tricky until the e-registrations are done. And as of last Friday, I could tell you we had 72 still not completed K-6, and that was after the deadline where the secretaries should have dropped. And so what I said back to the secretaries and administrators last week was, I'm going to assume that these 72 kids are kids in seats who have just not had their parents haven't e-registered them yet, because they should have been dropped if not. So we also still have that hurdle to get over, where we struggle sometimes to get parents to fully complete it.
So if even the numbers were coming in at the same rate, it seems like it's still an issue of having people do it on time. So is there any way that we can improve that? Or is that something you guys are looking at? I mean, if it's always been an issue,
Yeah.
then
Well, Steve would tell you back in the day that Becky Furlong used to take pans of brownies around to people once they got to 100% e-registration. Nick was probably, and Laura maybe been recipients of that. But I'm just trying to, you know, our buildings are, and that was a fun way to entice them, but I can tell you they are working hard. I've got circumstances where I have building principals, SFAs, counselors out knocking on doors, taking their computers and their hotspots and working with the families. They are out there doing everything they can to get our families registered.
Maybe one other thing to add that we heard from the principals is, because of the changes in the attendance areas, some of the folks who might have shown up as non-e-registered were not known to the buildings, where in years past, if that family hadn't e-registered, they might already have a personal relationship with staff in the building, which made it a little bit easier to reach out. They might better understand why the e-registration wasn't done. Are they out of the district, physically out of the district, and just simply aren't able to do it right now? Are they in the district? Is there a language issue? Is there a technology access issue, et cetera? And there was more knowledge of that. So I think we'll see a little bit, we'll see a return to that next year, when there's that knowledge base that in many cases was just absent this year. We heard that from some of our buildings as they went through that process, where as we were calling them literally daily, starting around the 1st of August, and they simply said, well, we don't know who they are, we don't know where they are. So that was a struggle for some of them.
And then I have a few more questions, actually. So I know this is dated September 8th, the Lincoln second grade,
Yeah.
that's an error? Or is
So, no. So I actually saw the same email that you guys received and reached out back to Julie just to make sure that my documents were accurate. So I would say the one thing that the teacher shared in there was that my document should have stated that August and September sections added. But when I went back to actually look at when we added that for Lincoln, it was August 26th. The circumstance for them is that they have posted, hired, interviewed, offered. The teacher accepted and then called back today and said that she wasn't coming.
So there will be 2 sections eventually, and there's only 1 currently? Is that how I read that? Okay.
Yeah.
And then I had the opportunity to go to Van Allen last week and observe their kindergarten classrooms and talk with their kindergarten teachers, and they raised some valid points that I'm just going to throw out there as maybe something that we need to look at when we do staffing next time around, and also some things that we've asked for with our state legislators that I think is very important. So the first one was the free preschool for 4-year-olds is only offered for 1 year. So sometimes you get kids that are enrolling into preschool that second year because they can't do preschool again because they would have to pay for to find it. So you've got some younger kids in there that maybe aren't ready for kindergarten to start for them just yet. So that's not on you guys. That's more on our state funding preschool wise. Another thing that they talked about was that kindergarten is kind of lumped into the K-6 when it's actually maybe should be looked at as early childhood education, and we staff our preschools a lot differently than we would staff a kindergarten room. So just, moving forward, that may be something that we need to look at when we look at this weighted resource allocation model, is that they've got some little bodies in there that have some needs and some kids that maybe aren't ready yet for kindergarten, so their staffing is maybe going to be a little bit different than having, the K, we lump them all K through 2 right now for their models there. There were some other things, but I think those are the two biggest things that I took away from that meeting with the teachers there.
Paul, just kind of add to that because, that's what I've been thinking about too, looking at these kindergarten numbers. 28 kindergartners. The other thing with kindergarten, one, yeah, it is more like early childhood. Kids are still going to adjust to this school thing. The other thing is, if a kid does have some exceptional behavioral needs, that's not going to be identified through the special ed process, and that might take a few months if it happens, right? And so to think about that, we're going to, we might have, I think, to put kindergarten in kind of a separate category, and maybe even like emergency get some paras on board in some of these places. I mean, if I've got 28 kids and somebody's got to go to the bathroom and I might have a couple behaviors, I just think, again, treating them a little differently. And I know, I get the model, I get the funding, I get what we're doing with RAM. And I know we're not going to take 28 in a certain school and do 2 of 14, right? That's probably too much to ask. But if we could, and I know it's not like paras aren't lined up out the door, but thinking about how we can modify the, for the future, maybe modify the model for K as separate from K2, and then to think about, the logistics of 28 kindergartners in any of our buildings. Getting up to those numbers is, and that's their first experience, right? Like this is the first time that they're in school, and we want that to be as positive as possible, I think, for parents and for their kids.
Yeah, and I got a couple questions from teachers as well with, the really, late movement, right? That it happens a lot, right? That it's like, oh, this number is not what we thought it was, and somebody has to move at the end. And so it was more of a process-based question. I was understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's something like June 1st or something, the data gets rolled up in Power School or something, and then it's like a however time frame again before then e-registration opens. And so the question was, can that time frame be minimized so people can get in there earlier, and then maybe we'd have better numbers earlier, to try and alleviate that. I mean, I don't remember exactly what the dates are on that, but.
So the numbers are definitely rolled over, and we really pull enrollment through about the first or second week in June. And then our secretaries, go on summer vacation, as well as the majority of our school personnel. And so the people that we have access to come back traditionally around August 1st now. So our principals are going to be there during the summer regardless, but our SFA group is back, our building secretaries at the elementary level are back on August 1st. So if we were to start opening e-registration up, we could do it maybe with the thought process that people just, if they're going to have questions, they're going to have to wait till August 1st, but for everybody else it's going to work okay for, we could do that. I still think we'll be working hard to get parents in or to get it done starting in August. But yeah, we could theoretically open that. I think it's a roughly, I wish Adam were here, the third week in June where, or July, where we could possibly open it. But probably not too much.
I guess I would say
earlier than that.
anything you can do would be helpful, in my opinion. I mean, if you're saying Adam told you that it looks like it's like this every year, well, that's a problem every year. If we can help it a little bit, because we can start a couple weeks earlier and have a better starting point as we start moving those pieces around, and it might help.
It's not going to get the families that you're missing the third week of July. families you're missing are the ones you're still going to be missing. That first, the weeks we're dealing with right now, they're probably not going to be the ones that get on the system in all of July. So some of our other ones will get in, the data will get in, but I think that's what Amy's speaking to. We're still going to have the missing parts, and I think the principals are highly motivated to do it because they know their staff depends on it, and there's probably nothing more motivating we can give them than you don't get staff if you don't get students registered. So,
But just to add to that, one of the pieces we did talk about, Sean, as we look at next year is providing more information or maybe signaling a little better to our buildings that are on that edge earlier in the process. And again, we don't want to create a panic in a building that thinks they might lose a staff member, but also we don't want to walk in the day before school and say, hey, by the way, we need to move you across town. And so we're trying to balance those pieces in terms of giving lead time but not giving too much lead time. And so being more explicit about what our process is, both in March and then through the summer, is something we've talked about, where we can make some enhancements and make sure that while we might not be able to make those decisions earlier on because of what Matt and Amy are saying about when families actually register, we could give our staff a better heads up of maybe the position their school's in terms of what they're considering and what they might be looking at as we get closer to the school year.
Yeah, and I agree with Matt that, you know, a lot of the folks that you're missing, you're still going to be missing. But I heard a lot of chatter on the social media this time around that people like thought they had already done it and didn't realize they had to do it. And these are people that are very involved in the schools and know what's going on. And they're just like, didn't we already do that? And it was specifically around a lot of kindergarten parents that went to kindergarten registration and then were like, wait, I got to do it again? And so there's just a lack of knowledge that that needed to happen. And if you get that information out there even 2 weeks earlier, that they're like, oh crap, I need to do that. That's 2 weeks earlier for those folks. So it might not catch everybody, but I think it will pick up some. Whether it dramatically changes anything or not, I don't know. And I would assume this year is particularly bad with all the boundary movements, and a lot of folks didn't even realize that maybe they're at a different school than they were in the first place. So I think that probably exacerbated the situation, but if we can tweak it just a little bit to help, I see no reason not to try.
And I can say that at my kid's school, and maybe all the principals do this, our principal sends home a pink form to every family, and he'll keep sending it home until the family turns it back, and this is in the spring. So he wants to know where every family is going to be in the fall. And I don't know if all the principals are doing that, but he will keep sending it. If you don't, and he'll tell you this: if you don't return the form, you're going to keep seeing it. So he's really on top of trying to find out: are you going to be in a different school than you are this year? Are you planning to move this summer? If so, where? Are you going to be staying in the same place? So I don't know if we could just get all of our principals, maybe, or.
At the end of the day, I really appreciate that kind of effort, but we have to use one database to track the student enrollment. So as much effort as your principal's putting in, those e-registrations, for us, and the earlier we do it, great, but we won't pull, or we will pull, and it's when it gets to that tipping point, right? You've gone over your aspirational goal, or it doesn't look like you're going to meet it. We also don't want to mess with somebody's livelihood if those kids are going to show up. Those 5 circumstances that I just spoke to, Kirkwood, Borlaug, Lemmy, Van Allen, Wickham, we would be silly to pull, and tomorrow, students walk in and they're right back over their aspirational goal. That's how close it is when we set this top range of this aspirational goal. If we were working more with ranges, we'd probably have a little bit more flexibility of, we're not going to take that person, you're kind of falling within this range, we're not going to take the FTE away. But, kind of hitting at the top of these aspirational goals where we're tipping over, and we've been in the mode of allocating the FTE. It makes it so critical that their e-registrations are there. And then we'll have a circumstance, and it's rare, but maybe a family e-registers, and then a week later they're pulling out of the school too, right? And so now where you award an FTE the week before because of tipping over, you just lost one. So it's a game of chess.
I was just going to say a little different tone, just an observation I want to make a little different. I just noticed that the 4 largest schools in our district that are all 500 or 4 students short of 500 and above all have 24.4 students and above. So they have the highest percentage with the exception of Borlaug. But they have the highest percentages. Our smaller schools all have the smallest class sizes. So I think it's just an observation I want to make to the board as we think about budget, as we think about programming, as we think about things that we want to do different. Our smaller schools all have smaller class sizes, fewer sections, fewer class sizes. And we can see that with these numbers. Do you have anything you want to say about that? or-
I mean, we just know our bigger buildings yield better efficiencies, right? So you can't split a cohort of, 26 at a RAM 2 school. You need to split it into, 2 sections there, where if it was in a larger situation where you might be garnering more families, have more kids in your attendance center. So Craig would often speak to that, right? The efficiencies of our bigger buildings versus our smaller buildings.
Maybe if I can just add one more note, because we struggle with this too. Remember that last year, we had an enormous number of kids that moved in after the October 1st count date. So we're a little bit unique from many of the other districts that have a relatively static enrollment. The kids who show up the first day of school are often the same number of kids that are there at the end. And so that's one of the things that we struggle with over the course of the year, is as much time, energy, and effort as we put into this between June 1st and August 23rd. By October or November, there are classes that you'll discover that are significantly larger or smaller than what shows on here. And there's a lot of mid-year adjustment that we have to do, which usually comes in the form of providing support staff, because we simply can't at that point in time collapse classrooms 3 into 2, 5 into 4, and move a teacher. So I just want to point that out too, we get this as, when it's on a sheet of paper, it looks really nice and it can be a static set of data, but it's a constantly evolving process. Amy and I actually run these sheets throughout the year as we try to work with this, and especially after we roll into the new calendar year, we're consistently looking for hot spots on there as families transition in and out, and some of our buildings have more of that than others, so it's an ongoing challenge for us.
One thing Anita's done in the past at Kirkwood is on the National Night Out, which is always the first Tuesday in August, to put together like a little block party in the neighborhoods that are going to have the more low-income housing and possible transient populations. And the SFAs are out there with their laptops and a hotspot, and a local church will donate food, or Hy-Vee will donate food. Food is key. Games and things for kids to do, I think it had been pretty successful in catching some of those folks, because it's late enough in the summer where you might get a lot of those, and a lot of those neighborhoods aren't having kind of national night out events organized. And so it's good timing. It's a good community thing to get out, meet new families, maybe get the PTO out there to try to get some involvement. So that might be good timing and just an idea for folks. Again, I think the key thing is community partnerships to provide some food and some volunteer help. But if our SFAs have already reported, that kind of helps.
Alexander's another great example. Shannon Miner does a great job and with Chris, getting out into their neighborhoods in early August as well.
So,
Should we talk about secondary?
So on the secondary document, it should look very similar to the one you see in the class size enrollment update, similar to the same model Amy's continued to present to you. We've kind of went to a somewhat standard one here where we show you the different core sections and then some of the elective areas. So you see overall students sections and then the average of the students per class. Like you guys just talked through in the elementary model, some of our larger buildings, secondary-wise, it's easier to spread out some of the efficiency. So class sizes are high, though. When we look across there, you see a lot of numbers in the upper 20s and some tipping over the 30s. Obviously, they're pretty fairly well balanced between the 3 comprehensive junior highs and the 3 comprehensive high schools. I believe Liberties are a little lower as we continue to offer an equitable program there. They'll continue to grow into that. Their numbers have climbed. But to offer the same type of opportunities to those students, we're still running a little low in some of the class numbers there comparatively to West or City. So I would just take any questions you might have, but that's a pretty quick overview of the document.
No students at Tate are involved in music?
Well, we don't have a music program at Tate.
They can't. I thought that, talking with Dr. McReynolds, that any students that wanted to do music at Tate could go to City High. And
right, so they'd be...
Now that they're at Hoover, they're even closer.
Well, they'd be figured into the city high enrollment numbers for
okay,
that, yeah.
so they'd just be on there?
Yeah, just for the purpose of this chart, we show it
Okay.
as a 0 there because there's no staff committed to it at Tate.
One thing I was reminded of when I walked through the North Central Junior High and checking out their new renovations there and talking with Principal Miller was that their classroom space is larger than some of the others, like Southeast. Like you couldn't fit 30 kids in some of those rooms in the older part of the building where he can at North Central. So he was, very aware of that when he knew his class sizes were bigger. Also, the needs of the students differ. So, like I said, I just wanted to put that out there that we do have some space issues in some of the older buildings.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of those classroom layouts obviously affect how the principals can schedule and staff certain classes and where they're able to put them in. Southeast was one in particular that has some smaller rooms, but has been helped with some of the renovation. They'll capture some space back too.
So this might be a good time for me to ask, in the student enrollment report this
Yep.
year, could we have the individual class section sizes like we got 2 years ago added
Yeah,
down?
so I think what you're talking about there is the scatter plot that shows every individual section. So for
Exactly.
example, if you had social studies averaging 30.4, you'll be able to see that one section might have 36 and one might have 24, right? And then
Yeah.
the average equals out, yep. So we can definitely pull that and we'll have that for you.
And add that to that report?
Yeah.
That'd be great, thank
Yeah.
you.
So I have one final comment before or at least for me. And one thing that I was reminded of, and you've heard me advocate a lot for mental health for our teachers as well. And I'm just curious, we're seeing more personal observation, more and more teachers taking personal or sick days for their mental health, I would say. They just need to remove themselves from a situation where maybe it's a little stressful for their class sizes. And when we do that, we have to hire substitute teachers, which also come out of the general fund, so our costs go up there as well. Not something you guys can solve, but that was more of a pitch when I'm sure Mary, Masher, and Amy, and Zach, and all those guys are watching our meeting here at 9:45 at night. But just another reason that we need to try and work to get more funding to get these class sizes lowered is not only for the success of our students, but for the success and mental health of our teachers out there.
Yeah, and also flexibility with categorical funding. And I know I wrote, and I know the answer, I'm going to get back on this one, but is there any way that we can use some of our TLC coaches to help us with some of this problem as far as, teaching actual sections instead of coaching other teachers?
If they're identified as a coach, that role has to be to serve adults, not students. So it's pretty clear in the teacher leadership role that
That's
they're
something
there to
if
support
the
the
legislator
adults,
gave us
not
that
the students.
flexibility,
Yep.
if we had the flexibility with that, we could actually do some things, couldn't we?
Yeah, we could. We actually had a conversation about that today when we were looking at staffing and as we were planning forward for next year and literally brainstorming every option we have to try to reduce class sizes. We had a pretty extensive discussion about that this morning.
All right, any other questions, comments from Matt or Amy? Thanks for the data and the comments and questions and insights. Okay, folks, Director Liaison Report, anything folks would like to highlight?
I'd just like to say that a lot of us attended the ribbon cutting ceremonies, and this is more just a reminder to the public that there'll be another one for Man coming up this week on Thursday.
5 o'clock?
And if you haven't seen Man or Longfellow, because they're similar, but I would highly recommend you get out there to see it.
That's great. Okay, nothing else on liaison report. We've got agenda setting. We've got Ed Committee meeting next Tuesday at Liberty, and we'll be going over PBIS. Who's actually going to be doing the presentation or leading the discussion?
Laura Daly, direct.
Okay.
Laura's still here?
Yeah.
No, she's gone now. She'll be helping us with that, but it'll be primarily led by the Liberty High team as they implemented that with the bolts, as you heard Sean's son talk about that tonight. So they'll talk through some of their values and how they've worked through PBIS in particular there.
Great, thank you. We've got a governance, policy and governance committee meeting on the 24th, routine at 4 o'clock. Talking about our legislative priorities. We have a draft of those out there, as well as our continued work around pivoting from Carver to the new IASB-based policy framework. And then the primary...
Can I interject something there? Since it's the beginning of the year, new agendas for policy and governance, I'm wondering if we could get conflict of interest on one of your agendas again at some point?
Worked into the numbers of the policies, so we're covering that. So it's not a separate policy, like if it's, it'll be in the 400s or 300s or wherever it lands. So as we're working through those, we're adding that in.
Oh, so you're adding something additional?
Yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, as there'll be an update on the 24th from that meeting, and we can talk more, but there is conflict of interest and fraternization policies within that.
And there's a
Okay. That are
nepotism
new.
policy in there too, remember?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so we'll have an update, Ruthina, at the full board meeting on the 24th from P&G?
On there, yep. Item H, policy review.
Item H. I have to learn how to read, apparently.
So
There it
we're
is, right
adding
there.
in
Got
the
it.
policy
So,
review.
yeah, on the 24th agenda, we've got our standard consent agenda. We'll add P&G update from policy review. We've got a couple of SBRC action items. I'm wondering if we need to have a follow-up discussion following on the safety in the threat assessment material that we covered tonight. I think that would be helpful. We may have some data back from the grant proposal and just where that is, and just to note that even if we were to be awarded that grant, we don't necessarily have to accept the grant if that's not what the board wishes to do. So, but I think getting an update on what that is would be helpful. We should have that information by then, I think. So discussion item on threat assessment work. Anything else that directors would like to add to the 24th?
I don't know if this meeting would be a good place to put it, but I know last academic year we had discussed the calendar team looking at having the election day worked in where there's not a school day due to safety concerns and especially an issue that happened in a special election recently. I don't know if they've started looking in that and how that would impact future calendars, but an update on that would be great.
They've already got that in the draft for the upcoming calendar, so they've already made that change to it. Maybe just a note for you is we're also having conversation, I know Brady's not here anymore, but having conversation with ICEA about working with their members to understand their PD needs a little bit better.
Okay.
We won't have an update for you at that point in time. I just want to let you know that that's something that we're working on with them right now, is how to get that feedback directly. They want to get it, input from as many of their members as possible. But the election day, we've already worked that into subsequent calendars so that you'll see that it's the main election day. So you know that there's multiple election days during the year. But for our main election day in November, that then becomes a day off for students.
And remind me again, we see those 3-year calendars to approve at which meeting?
We like to see them before the end of this calendar year, but depending on the feedback that we get from ICEA, we'll see if we're able to keep that schedule.
Okay.
I'm wondering if we could get an update on the new boundaries and transitions that schools have made with that. We heard a little bit tonight with the registration difficulties, but just how that's going for the schools. A lot of our schools have many changes in population, numbers. I'm interested in specifically hearing about a couple of things. I'd like to hear about how attendance support busing is going. We heard tonight about some difficulties some families are having with that, but I'm wondering if you could tell us just how many attendance support buses we have, if there are kids that need busing that are not getting it, and then also I'm interested in knowing about after-school program access, and if the kids that need that are getting it in the new schools that they're assigned to, or if there's issues with that. And if next meeting is too soon to get that information, you can just put it on the
October.
China's flying. So whenever is, feasible to get that information.
Okay, we'll look at the first meeting in October. All right, perfect.
I've got a couple things. One, a pretty big one, and one that I think would be a fairly short discussion. I want us to find the time to actually go back and talk about kind of the structure, our facility structure. We mentioned, you know, about this time last year when we worked on boundaries and everything, we told everybody this shortly after the first year we were going to get back to talking about paired schools specifically and other things like that. And that has not happened. It is not shortly after the beginning of the year. It is now almost to the end of the next year. So somewhere along the lines we need to bring up that conversation. And it's not just paired schools, but whether we talk about preschool centers or a middle school approach or what other things might be out there. That's a big lift, but that needs to get put somewhere because we said we were going to do it and we've really not done it. And in that process, I had people ask me, is the board serious about this time around? They're not just going to talk about it and then walk away from it? And I said, yes, we're serious about it. And I feel like we walked away from it, so I don't want to walk away from it. I mean, there's things there that we could potentially, you know, make big changes, positive changes, but if we don't talk about it, nothing will ever happen, and it's not quick stuff.
So-
The little one that I want to talk about sooner than later is now that Liberty is almost at its full size, I think we need to revisit the secondary voluntary transfer policy that we have, because it's not the same at all the secondary schools right now. We already hit the elementary, and we were kind of waiting till Liberty was done. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's supposed to be done by next fall, right? It would be good to address that sooner than later so we know what's going on in the fall.
I think that's good, and I don't know what the time frame is for confirming what that policy change or might be so that we have the proper time to communicate. I think that's your point. We just don't want to get surprised by that. On the paired school, magnet school, that conversation, we did raise it at one point this spring, and I think what we decided, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we were going to bundle those conversations into the facilities discussions, kind of what's the next round of work there. And I'm with you, we haven't started talking about what that next round of facilities work looks like. We've said we want to have it be based on the educational direction that we want to choose for the district, that we've got these other inputs into it. And so we just need to decide how we're going to tackle that, and at what point do we believe we've got enough data and inputs to start that conversation, because I think we've kind of punted this one a couple of times, and so I'm uncomfortable with it too, because we did make some statements that we were going to cover that. I'm struggling with this one a little bit. We can schedule a work session, but again, if it's going to be a work session to say, oh, we don't have the data that we need to actually do this, then we're going to end up punting again.
I do think that discussion needs to come before facilities, because it's going to, I mean, that could potentially have a big impact on facilities. If you're talking about pairing,
Yeah.
if you're talking about magnets, if you're talking about preschools, all of that has to do with facilities. So if that's going to drive facilities, I mean, obviously we can do facilities as far as updates and things that we know, I'm sure there's a million things, but if we're going to make sort of big structural shifts, or even big structural shifts in certain parts or whatever, that's going to have an impact.
So maybe we need just a work session on what are the data points that we believe we need to have. We've talked about the profile of the learner, profile of the graduate, and the Patel work. If that's something we believe we need to have as an input, then let's be transparent about we're going through this process, we're going to create this piece, we're going to use that as an input to decide next steps on what our facilities look like, including pairing, magnet, et cetera. Or if we believe we can get started without some of those data points, then fine. Let's just be transparent about what it is we need to start that conversation in earnest. I mean, we just need to decide what we want to do, I guess. And do we want to have a work session item on this and just kind of try to get organized on our work around the FMP 2.0 and what data points we need to start the conversation?
I think it'd be really helpful for
Yes.
us to put a timeline together so that we can start identifying
Yeah.
when we want those things done.
And then it can start driving the incremental collection of data, whatever. So work session, next meeting in October. I mean, next meeting's pretty light. So a work session might be okay on the 24th? Okay, shall we? All right.
On the 24th.
September 24th.
Okay.
Because that full board agenda is fairly light, so we should have time for that conversation.
Yeah, at some point in time, I think we need to revisit the apprenticeship and trades was one of the things we discussed at the retreat, but that's just a parking lot item as far as when we put it in, but that needs to be brought up.
I think that is also part of that educational direction that we want to take as a district, and how does that then inform what our facilities needs are? And so I think all these things are kind of rolling up together. So let's spend some time next meeting trying to get organized on what that timeline looks like, activities that we do to start pushing this one forward. That's good. Anything else?
Not for any meeting come up, but just that, 'cause as we know it, like the Roosevelt situation, and just as we get more info on that, just trying to keep our eye on
All right. If nothing else for agenda, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.